She wasn't rich. She wasn't lucky. She was relentless. Navy scrubs, double shifts, and a notebook called Freedom. She cut, saved, hustled, until enough was enough. Not glamorous, but finally free. Watch the full story, the nurse who retired at 40. The night shift had its own smell. A mix of antiseptic wipes, stale coffee, and exhaustion that clung to every corner of St. Matthew's Hospital. At 3 in the morning, when the rest of the city surrendered to dreams, the hospital remained its own sleepless organism, humming, blinking, pulsing with urgency. For nearly 20 years, Maya Hernandez had walked these halls. She knew their sounds the way others knew the voices of their children. The steady beep of heart monitors, the hiss of oxygen, the rubbery squeak of shoes against the wax linoleum. These weren't just noises. They were the soundtrack of her life. But tonight, as Maya's sneakers carried her down the ICU corridor, every sound felt sharper, more fragile, as if the walls themselves knew this was her last shift. Her last 12 hours in scrubs. Her last time checking vitals, adjusting tubes, scribbling chart notes. At 40 years old, Maya was retiring. Not in the traditional way. She had no pension plan ballooning with decades of service, no seven-figure account waiting to fund champagne cruises. Her freedom would not look glamorous on Instagram. Instead, it would look quiet, pared down, deliberate. She had built a life that could be lived joyfully, peacefully, on just $30,000 a year. And that was enough. Maya paused at the nurse's station. The computer screens glowed in soft blue, patient vitals scrolling endlessly. A younger nurse, maybe 24, sat typing nervously, her ponytail swishing as she shifted in her chair. She looked up at Maya with weary curiosity. "You okay?" she asked. "You look different tonight." Maya offered the faintest smile. "I'm fine. Just a long night." She didn't add the truth. That every hallway, every clipboard, every flickering fluorescent bulb felt heavy with finality. Tomorrow, she would hand in her badge and walk out. For good. For the young nurse, retirement was a word that belonged to another universe. For Maya, it was now a door swinging open. But to understand this moment, you had to rewind. Back to when Maya was 22, fresh out of nursing school, working nights not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She'd grown up in a modest neighborhood where money was always just enough, never more. Her parents were immigrants, proud but stretched thin. College was a dream paid for with loans and credit cards. By the time she graduated, Maya carried nearly $40,000 in student debt and a few $1,000s in revolving credit card balances. Her first paycheck felt like oxygen, but the bills devoured it quickly. Rent, car payment, minimum student loan dues, groceries. By the second week, she was already counting coins in the bottom of her purse. She told herself it was normal. Everyone she knew was in debt. Everyone she knew lived paycheck to paycheck. But the turning point came late one night. She was 24, sitting in her beat-up car after a double shift. Her body ached so badly she felt hollow. She opened her online banking app, and the screen blinked back. $183.42. Her credit card balance, meanwhile, was $2,140. She'd just worked 24 hours in 2 days. And yet she was broke. She cried in the driver's seat that night, hands gripping the steering wheel, whispering a promise to herself. This can't be my life forever. Something has to change. Change didn't come as a thunderbolt. It came in whispers, in small, stubborn choices. She sold the shiny car she couldn't afford and bought an old Honda in cash. She moved out of the trendy downtown loft she had been so proud of and rented a modest one-bedroom on the edge of town. She began packing lunches, beans, lentils, rice, roasted vegetables. Her coworkers teased her for always eating prison meals, but she ignored them. Every dollar not spent was another brick in the wall she was quietly building. It was around this time that she stumbled across the FIRE community, financial independence, retire early. At first, she thought they were lunatics. Retiring in your 30s? Living on half your income? It sounded impossible. But she kept reading. And slowly, she realized it wasn't about winning the lottery or finding some golden investment. It was about choices. Living below your means. Saving aggressively. Investing consistently. She began to measure her spending not by what she could afford, but by what it cost her in time. A new phone? That was 30 hours of work. A vacation? 2 months of freedom gone. And freedom, not possessions, became her currency. Back in the ICU, a monitor beeped sharply. Maya snapped back to the present. Room 312. An elderly man's oxygen mask needed adjusting. She moved quickly, steady as always. Her hands worked from muscle memory. Lift the tubing, check the levels, tuck the blanket. The man stirred faintly, eyes fluttering open. Maya leaned close, speaking softly. You're okay. I've got you. He blinked at her, fragile and frightened. She squeezed his hand gently. This was what she would miss. The quiet intimacy of care, the sacred trust of strangers. But she would not miss the endless bureaucracy, the understaffed shifts, the emotional drain, the ache that followed her home like a shadow. She had given 20 years. She had given enough. The younger nurse approached again during a lull. So, you're really leaving? Maya nodded. But you're only 40. Yes. The girl frowned. How? How does that even work? Maya wanted to tell her everything. About the years of saying no when everyone else said yes. About the notebooks filled with handwritten budgets. About the investing account she'd quietly fed every month, even when it was just $50. About the used furniture, the second-hand clothes, the skipped vacations. About the evenings she sat alone in her apartment, cooking beans and reading personal finance blogs while her friends went out. But she only said, I live below my means. And I save the difference. The girl blinked. It sounded too simple. But simple doesn't mean easy. The hours stretched on. Another code blew. Another crisis averted. Another chart written. By the time dawn broke, the hospital walls glowed pale gray with morning light. The shift change buzzed through the air as fresh nurses shuffled in. Maya gave her final report, calm and precise, every detail delivered like muscle memory. When she finished, she lingered. Well, she said softly, this is it for me. Heads turned. I'm retiring. The word hung in the air. At 40, she added. Silence. Then a ripple of disbelief. You're retiring? At 40? One nurse asked. You're joking, another said. But Maya wasn't joking. She wasn't seeking applause or permission. She was simply stating a fact. She gathered her things, slung her worn backpack over her shoulder, and walked toward the sliding doors. They opened with a hiss. The morning sun poured over her face. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, she felt light. This was the end of her last night's shift. But it was also the beginning of her real life. The narrator's voice, steady and reflective, would take over here. Maya Hernandez's journey was not built on miracles. It wasn't the product of a lottery ticket or a windfall inheritance. It was built on choice, on the radical act of defining enough for herself. Her story isn't about retiring rich. It's about retiring free. And, as she stepped out of St. Matthew's Hospital for the final time, the question that lingered was not how did she do it? It was why can't we? The first apartment Maya rented after nursing school was nothing special. Beige carpet, peeling paint near the window frame, and a neighbor who played the trumpet at all hours. But to 22-year-old Maya Hernandez, it was independence incarnate. She had graduated only a month earlier, diploma still crisp in its folder, and had landed her first nursing job. The paycheck felt enormous at first. After years of part-time shifts in coffee shops and library desks, after late nights studying under fluorescent lights, seeing those 4 digits in her account was intoxicating. She did what most young professionals do when they feel the surge of arrival. She spent it. The car lot gleamed under the California sun the day she signed for her first grown-up purchase. A silver Honda Civic, brand new, monthly payments of $329. She remembered the salesman's smile, the pen sliding across the contract, the smell of leather that seemed to whisper success. Her friends congratulated her. You deserve it, Maya. You're a nurse now. You're set for life. Those words echoed in her ears like a promise. Set for life. But she wasn't set. She was sinking. She just didn't know it yet. Every 2 weeks, her paycheck arrived, and just as quickly, it vanished. Rent, $1,100. Car payment, $329. Student loan minimum, $285. Credit card minimums, $70. Gas, groceries, scrubs, dinners out. The math was merciless. What remained at the end of the month was often less than $100. And when the unexpected happened, a flat tire, a medical copay, an invitation to a friend's birthday dinner. She had only one tool, her credit card. By the end of her first year, her balance was just under $5,000. Maya told herself this was normal. Everyone she knew had debt. Everyone she knew was catching up. But late at night, when she sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, staring at the bills scattered across her kitchen table, a knot formed in her stomach. The knot grew tighter after each 12-hour shift. She'd come home bone-tired, body aching, but unable to sleep. Her mind ran the numbers like a cruel loop. Paycheck in, bills out, nothing left. She was caring for patients, saving lives, giving everything she had, and yet she was barely surviving herself. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked Thursday. Maya had just finished a double shift, 24 hours in 2 days. Her scrubs smelled faintly of antiseptic and sweat. She collapsed into the driver's seat of her shiny Honda Civic, hands trembling as she slid the key into the ignition. Her phone buzzed. A notification from her bank app. Account balance, $183.42. She froze. Her rent was due in 5 days. The balance wouldn't cover it. She pulled up her credit card app. Balance, $2,140. The rain hammered against the windshield, and for the first time in years, Maya cried. Not the quiet tears of fatigue, but the deep, shaking sobs of someone who felt trapped. She had done everything right. She had studied hard, chosen a respectable career, worked grueling hours. And yet, she was broke. In that car, with rain blurring the city lights, she whispered the words that would change her life. This cannot be my forever. I need another way. The next morning, Maya began her quiet rebellion. Her first act was small. She canceled her cable subscription. $45 a month gone. Then she packed a lunch of rice and beans for her shift. Another $10 saved. The savings were invisible at first, barely dents in the mountain. But Maya noticed something, a feeling. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting to money. She was directing it. It was power. One weekend, restless and searching, she stumbled across a blog about personal finance. The writer talked about something Maya had never heard before: the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. At first, she scoffed. Retire early? With student loans and credit cards? Impossible. But curiosity tugged at her. She devoured articles late into the night, words glowing on her laptop screen. Frugality is freedom. Every dollar has two choices: spend now or buy your future. The average person spends 40 years working. What if you could do it in 15? The more she read, the more the impossible began to feel like a blueprint. She started with her budget. Not the vague kind she had scribbled before, but a line-by-line account. Rent, utilities, car, groceries, gas, student loans, credit card payments. For the first time, she saw it clearly, the map of her life in numbers. And with that map, she began to navigate. She moved out of the beige apartment with trumpet-playing neighbors and into a smaller unit on the outskirts of town. $900 rent instead of $1,100. She sold her beloved Civic. The new car smell was gone, but the payment remained. She traded it for a used Toyota Corolla she bought in cash. Her co-workers raised eyebrows. Why'd you downgrade? You're a nurse. You can afford better. Maya smiled politely, but said nothing. She knew the truth. Appearances were a trap. Her lunches became legend at the hospital. Lentil soups, beans with rice, vegetable stir-fries. Co-workers teased her, calling her the frugal queen. But Maya didn't mind. Each container of beans was another piece of her future. Each dollar she didn't spend was a dollar she invested. She opened her first index fund account, shaky hands clicking submit on a $100 deposit. It felt small, laughable even, but she reminded herself, compounding doesn't mock small beginnings. It rewards them. Months turned into years. Her debt shrank. $5,000 became $3,000, then $1,000. Finally, the credit card balance hit zero. She celebrated not with champagne, but with a notebook. On the first page, she wrote, "Debt-free. Day one of freedom." It wasn't glamorous. No one threw her a party. But for Maya, it was the sweetest victory she'd ever tasted. And yet, the journey wasn't without setbacks. There were months when she slipped, when exhaustion pulled her toward takeout, when loneliness whispered that she deserved a shopping spree, when friends invited her on vacations she couldn't justify. She stumbled, but she didn't stop. She taped a note above her desk. Retire at 40. Live free on $30,000 a year. It wasn't just a goal. It was her North Star. Back in the hospital, years later, when she'd been over patient beds and whispered comfort, she carried that North Star in her mind. Each shift wasn't just labor. It was an exchange, hours for freedom units. And slowly, the scales tipped. By the time she was 35, Maya's net worth had crossed 6 figures. Her coworkers still teased her beans and secondhand clothes, but some began to ask questions. How do you do it? How are you always calm about money? Maya smiled. Because I don't need more. I only need enough. The breaking point in her car at 24 had not been the end. It had been the beginning. It was the moment Maya Hernandez stopped being a nurse trapped by debt and started becoming a woman building her freedom. And now, 16 years later, with the dawn of retirement at 40, she could trace it all back to that rainy night, to $183.42 and the tears that washed away her illusions. The narrator's voice would draw the thread here. Maya's story is not unique. Debt is a language millions speak fluently. Exhaustion is the background music of modern work. But what makes her story powerful is the choice she made, to see the trap and to step out of it. Not with one leap, but with steady steps. With notebooks and beans. With patience and sacrifice. Her breaking point became her blueprint. There was no confetti when Maya paid off her last credit card. No applause when the number hit 0. It happened quietly, late on a Tuesday night, the glow of her laptop reflecting across the kitchen table in her small apartment. She closed the tab, leaned back in her chair, and exhaled. For the first time in years, she didn't know anyone. No minimum payments hanging like shadows. No red numbers blinking from her online portal. It was supposed to feel like victory, and it did, in part. But mostly, it felt like standing at the edge of a vast ocean, realizing the real work had only just begun. Debt-free was not the destination. It was the starting line. In the months that followed, Maya began what she would later call her quiet rebellion. Not rebellion in the loud, dramatic sense. No angry speeches. No grand gestures. This rebellion was subtle. It was choosing the unglamorous path in a culture that worshipped excess. She looked at her coworkers buying SUVs and granite countertop homes and told herself, not me. She looked at Instagram feeds filled with vacations, shopping hauls, champagne brunches and whispered, I'm walking another road. Her rebellion began with subtraction. The first thing she cut was her wardrobe. For years, she had fallen into the cycle of buying new clothes each season, scrolling sales, convincing herself that another blouse, another pair of shoes would fix her fatigue. One Saturday, she pulled everything from her closet and spread it across her bed. Jeans she hadn't worn in years. Dresses with tags still attached. Heels that pinched her feet so badly she had never left the house in them. She stared at the pile and felt sick. How many shifts had she worked for this? How many hours spent on her feet, back aching, so she could fill her closet with fabric that meant nothing? She donated half. Sold another quarter online. What remained was simple, a capsule wardrobe. Neutral scrubs, jeans, a few solid tops, a cardigan, sneakers, one good pair of boots. Her mornings grew easier. Less choice, less clutter. More time, more space. Minimalism wasn't loss. It was liberation. Her second act of rebellion came in the kitchen. She had always been a decent cook, but exhaustion had made her a regular customer of takeout apps. Thai food after night shifts, pizza on weekends, the occasional sushi splurge. Now, she attacked her grocery list with the same precision she once used for patient charts. Rice, beans, oats, frozen vegetables, lentils, chicken thighs, potatoes. Staples, versatile and cheap. On Sundays, she meal prepped for the week, containers lined neatly in her fridge. To her co-workers, it looked dull. To Maya, it looked like freedom stacked in plastic boxes. Each meal was a declaration. I will not trade my hours for overpriced calories. But perhaps her boldest rebellion was financial. With her debt gone, she redirected every spare dollar into investing. At first, it was terrifying. The stock market felt like a casino she didn't understand. But she read and studied and realized that she didn't need to gamble. She needed simplicity. She chose index funds, broad, diversified, low cost. She automated contributions so the money left her account before temptation could reach it. Her first deposit was $100. Her second, $250. Over time, her confidence grew. By the end of that first year, she was saving nearly half her income. Her friends thought she was insane. You make good money. Why live like you're poor? But Maya wasn't living poor. She was living free. Still, freedom had a cost. Her family didn't understand. At gatherings, her cousins showed off new cars, fresh tech, expensive vacations. Maya arrived in her decade-old Toyota, wearing the same cardigan, bringing a homemade dish instead of a catered tray. They teased her, sometimes cruelly. Don't be so cheap, Maya. You're a nurse. You can afford better. You can't take it with you, you know. Each comment stung. Part of her wanted to defend herself, to shout that she wasn't cheap, she was strategic. That she wasn't hoarding, she was building. That while they borrowed tomorrow's money for today's pleasures, she was quietly buying decades of her life back. But she learned to stay quiet. Let them laugh. Her rebellion wasn't meant to be understood. In the quiet of her apartment, she created rituals that grounded her. At the end of each month, she sat with her notebook. Income on one side, expenses on the other. She wrote each category by hand. Rent, groceries, utilities, transportation. Subtracted, tallied, adjusted. When she saved more than she expected, she smiled. When she slipped, she didn't spiral. She adjusted. The notebook became her mirror, reflecting not just her finances, but her discipline. Loneliness was the hardest part. There were nights when she longed to say yes. To join coworkers at fancy dinners, to book the vacation, to buy the shoes, to live like everyone else. But then she would open her notebook, trace her finger across the growing investment column, and remind herself, this is the life I choose. She discovered online communities of people walking the same path. Forums, blogs, podcasts, voices reminding her she wasn't alone. Stories of teachers, truck drivers, single parents, all fighting for freedom. They became her invisible companions, proof that her rebellion was part of something larger. Over the years, her life took on a rhythm. Work, save, invest, cook, rest, repeat. To outsiders, it looked dull. To Maya, it was power. Her investments grew steadily. First 5 figures, then 6. Each milestone felt surreal. She, the broke 24-year-old crying in her Civic, now had more saved than she once thought possible. She learned to see wealth not as numbers on a screen, but as time stored away. Every dollar saved was a future shift she wouldn't have to work. And that, more than anything, kept her moving. By the time she turned 35, Maya had amassed enough to cover a year's expenses without working. The realization washed over her like sunlight. She tested it, took a 2-week vacation without guilt, funded entirely from savings. For the first time, she experienced what it felt like to live without financial chains. She wanted more. Her goal sharpened. Retire at 40. Not retire to luxury. Retire to freedom. The resistance around her only grew. Her parents worried. Mija, are you sure? Nurses get pensions. You should stay safe. Her coworkers scoffed. I'd go crazy living like you. What's the point of working if you don't enjoy it? But Maya had discovered the point. The point was that enjoyment wasn't tied to spending. The point was that peace came not from possessions, but from ownership of her own time. Her rebellion wasn't loud. It was in every choice to brew coffee at home instead of spending $5 at a cafe. It was in every decision to mend clothes instead of buying new. It was in every no that sounded like deprivation to others, but felt like liberation to her. And slowly, her rebellion built a fortress. By the time her 39th birthday passed, Maya's net worth had crossed 7 figures. She didn't flaunt it. She didn't announce it. She simply looked at the number, closed her notebook, and smiled. The rebellion had worked. The narrator's voice here would soften, reflective. What Maya discovered in those years was not just the power of saving, but the deeper truth of enough. She learned that freedom isn't bought with more, but protected with less. Her rebellion wasn't glamorous. It wasn't meant for headlines. It was quiet, but it was hers. And as her 40th birthday approached, she stood on the edge of something few ever touch, a life she had designed with her own hands. Frugality was easy when Maya was alone. At home, in her modest 1-bedroom, the choices felt natural. A pot of beans simmering on the stove, thrift store furniture, a growing investment account that made her feel safe. Alone, her path was clear, uncluttered by comparison. But life doesn't happen in isolation. And as Maya's financial discipline deepened, so too did the resistance from the people around her. It started with her co-workers. Nurses are a tribe. They bond over grueling shifts, dark humor, and the pressure cooker stress of saving lives with too few hands. They also bond over spending. After payday, the group text buzzed with plans: dinner at the trendy new fusion spot, drinks downtown, weekend shopping trips. For many, it was survival, a way to release the stress of 12-hour shifts filled with sickness, sorrow, and bureaucracy. But for Maya, each outing came with a price tag that wasn't just dollars. It was hours of her life. So she began to decline. Not tonight, she'd text. Maybe next time. At first, they understood. Everyone had nights when exhaustion won. But when her not tonights became a pattern, the whispers began. She never comes out anymore. Is she broke? Or just cheap? One evening in the break room, while Maya ate her meal-prepped lentils, a coworker laughed loudly. There she is, beans and rice again. Girl, when are you going to treat yourself? Maya smiled politely, but inside, a fire burned. I am treating myself, she thought. I'm treating myself to freedom. The pressure wasn't just at work. It came from family too. At Sunday dinners, her cousins flaunted new cars, fresh phones, designer shoes. They teased Maya for her decade-old Corolla, her simple cardigan, her habit of bringing homemade dishes instead of catering from restaurants. You're a nurse, Mija, her aunt said once, shaking her head. You can afford better. Why live like this? Maya wanted to explain, to show them the graphs, the compounding charts, the notebook filled with budgets and goals. To tell them that every choice she made wasn't about deprivation, but about liberation. But she had learned something. People rarely understand choices that expose their own insecurities. Her frugality made them uncomfortable, not because it was wrong, but because it challenged the story they told themselves about money. So she stopped defending herself. Let them think she was cheap. Let them laugh. Their approval wasn't her goal. The hardest pushback came from within. There were nights when loneliness clawed at her. When she scrolled through social media and saw friends clinking glasses in rooftop bars, traveling to beaches with turquoise water, posting selfies in new clothes. Her apartment felt small then. Her lentils tasted bland. Her notebook of numbers looked cold. She questioned herself. Is this worth it? Am I missing the best years of my life for a future that might never come? The doubt was sharp, real, and heavy. But then, she would remember the rain-soaked night in her Civic, staring at $183.42 in her account. She would remember the exhaustion of debt, the panic of scarcity, and she would whisper to herself, never again. That mantra became her shield. To strengthen it, Maya built rituals of resilience. Each month, she tracked her progress, not just in dollars, but in years of freedom gained. If her investments could cover 6 months of expenses, that was 6 months she wouldn't need to work in the future. Each dollar was time stored away. She celebrated milestones privately. The day her net worth hit $50,000, she bought herself a second-hand book on personal finance and spent the night reading it with a cup of tea. When she hit $100,000, she wrote the number on a sticky note and taped it above her desk. These small rituals reminded her that joy didn't have to be bought. Joy could be built. Still, society had a way of pressing in. One Christmas, her family pooled money to buy her a designer handbag. You deserve something nice, they said proudly. Maya smiled, thanked them, but inside she felt conflicted. The bag represented everything she had rejected: status, image, consumption. She used it politely at gatherings, but it sat in her closet the rest of the year, a silent reminder that people often project their values onto you. At work, the jokes about her frugality became legend. She's probably got millions hidden under her mattress, a nurse teased. You know Maya, she'd rather retire early than live a little, another said. They laughed, but Maya didn't flinch. Because beneath their teasing, she saw the truth. They were scared. She had overheard them whisper about payday loans, maxed-out credit cards, mortgages they couldn't keep up with. She saw the stress in their eyes when bills came due. Their laughter wasn't cruelty. It was defense. The pushback wasn't just social, it was systemic. Banks offered her pre-approved credit cards with flashy rewards. Car dealerships sent exclusive offers. Ads screamed from every screen, promising happiness in exchange for a swipe. The world wasn't designed for people like Maya. It was designed to keep her spending, working, consuming. Every day she said no. She wasn't just resisting people. She was resisting an entire system. Her rebellion grew teeth in those years. She stopped apologizing for her choices. When coworkers mocked her beans, she laughed and said, "They taste like freedom." When family questioned her car, she answered, "It runs, doesn't it? That's all I need." When ads promised luxury, she closed the browser and cooked dinner. She learned to carry her frugality not as shame, but as pride. And slowly, something shifted. The very people who mocked her began to ask questions. Quietly, in private. How did you pay off your loans so fast? Do you really save half your income? How? Could you show me how to budget? Maya never preached. But when asked, she shared. She showed coworkers her notebooks, explained the power of compound interest, encouraged them to cut small expenses that didn't bring joy. A few listened. Most didn't. But she didn't measure her success by their choices. Her success was measured in the growing peace she felt each month as her investments grew, her expenses shrank, and her freedom expanded. By her late 30s, Maya had weathered years of pushback. She was still teased, still questioned, still misunderstood. But she no longer needed validation. Her discipline had become her identity. Her values had become her armor. And as she approached 40, she looked back at the years of resistance and realized something. The pushback wasn't an obstacle. It was the training ground. It had forced her to strengthen her resolve, to sharpen her vision, to anchor herself in a purpose deeper than approval. The narrator's voice would rise here, steady and triumphant. Maya Hernandez learned that the road to freedom is not paved with applause. It is paved with resistance, with laughter, judgment, and doubt. But every pushback is an invitation to choose conformity or conviction. Maya chose conviction, and in that choice, she became unstoppable. There comes a moment in every long journey when the destination shifts from a dream to a possibility. For Maya Hernandez, that moment arrived one quiet evening in the most ordinary of places, her kitchen table. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. On the table lay her notebook, pages worn from years of budgeting and scribbled numbers. A calculator sat beside it, screen glowing faintly. She had just finished updating her accounts. Her pen hovered over the paper as she tallied the totals. Savings, investments, cash on hand. When she circled the final number, she froze. It was larger than she had expected, larger than she had ever imagined. Back in the days when $183.42 in her checking account had sent her spiraling into tears. Her investments now totaled $600,000. She stared at the figure, hardly breathing. $600,000. And that was when the thought, uninvited but undeniable, entered her mind. I might actually do this. The numbers told a story. If she kept saving half her income, if the markets returned even modest growth, if she continued her frugal lifestyle, she could cross the seven-figure mark within 5 years. 40. She could retire at 40. Not retire in the way her parents imagined, with pensions and golf courses and luxury vacations. Not retire in the way society flaunted, with mansions and yachts. But retire in her way. A modest, deliberate life where her time belonged to her alone. The realization washed over her with equal parts thrill and terror. Because now the dream wasn't abstract. It was real. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. What would I do with my days? Who would I be without nursing? What if I get bored? What if I fail? The questions tumbled, sharp and unrelenting. But beneath them, another voice whispered. A quieter, steadier voice. You've been walking toward this for years. You've earned the right to ask what's next. The turning point wasn't just in her numbers. It was in her imagination. For years, she had been focused only on subtraction, cutting, saving, saying no. But now, she began to ask herself a different question. What am I saying yes to? She pictured mornings without alarms. Walks through the park when the world was at work. Afternoons spent reading, writing, traveling slowly, not rushing. She pictured herself in a small cabin by the mountains, tending a garden, cooking meals, watching the seasons change. It wasn't luxury, but it was freedom. And that, she realized, was her luxury. At work, the realization changed her demeanor. Nursing was still grueling. 12-hour shifts still pressed into her bones. Bureaucracy still frustrated her. But now, every shift felt different, because she knew it was temporary. When a patient's monitor beeped endlessly, when paperwork piled high, when managers demanded overtime, she whispered to herself, 5 more years. 4 more years. 3. It became her secret countdown, and that countdown gave her strength. The shift wasn't just emotional. It was practical too. She became even more intentional with her money. She switched to a high-yield savings account for her emergency fund. She optimized her investment accounts for tax advantages. She tracked her expenses with precision, testing how low she could comfortably live. The magic number settled at $30,000 a year. 30,000. That was her enough. With her growing investments, that meant she didn't need millions to retire. Just the discipline to hold the line. Friends noticed the change in her. "You seem lighter," one coworker remarked during a break. Maya smiled. "Maybe I am." She didn't share the secret countdown. She didn't announce the 6 figures growing quietly in her accounts. She simply carried herself differently, with a confidence that came not from wealth, but from clarity. She knew where she was headed. Still, fear lingered. What if the market crashed? What if inflation soared? What if unexpected health problems drained her savings? Doubt whispered constantly. But instead of ignoring it, Maya turned the fear into preparation. She read books on financial planning, studied case studies of early retirees, learned about withdrawal strategies and safety margins. She built buffers into her plan: a larger emergency fund, a backup plan for part-time work if needed, a conservative withdrawal rate to ensure her money lasted. Each fear became a prompt for a solution. And with each solution, her confidence grew. One evening, she tested herself. She pretended, just for a month, that she was already retired. She lived only on what her projected retirement budget allowed. No extra shifts, no overtime pay, just a $30,000 lifestyle. It worked. She paid her rent, cooked her meals, took long walks, read books, visited friends. She didn't feel deprived. She felt whole. The experiment proved something vital. Retirement wasn't just possible. It was sustainable. The turning point deepened when she began to envision not just freedom from work, but freedom for purpose. For years, her identity had been bound to nursing. Who was she if not the one in scrubs, the one saving lives, the one giving herself away in every shift? But as she journaled about her future, she discovered new dreams. She wanted to volunteer at community health clinics, offering her skills without the burden of bureaucracy. She wanted to mentor younger nurses about financial wellness, showing them the path she had found. She wanted to travel slowly, not to escape, but to learn. She realized retirement wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The countdown ticked on. For years. 3 years. 2. Each milestone fueled her. Each paycheck, each budget review, each investment deposit felt like another step up the mountain. And one day, standing at her kitchen table, notebook open, calculator glowing, she realized something profound. She wasn't climbing alone anymore. Her story had begun to ripple. A younger nurse she had once mentored paid off her credit card debt after hearing Maya's story. A cousin began meal prepping to save money. A friend opened their first investment account. Her rebellion was no longer private. It was contagious. And that, perhaps, was the greatest turning point of all. The narrator's voice here would settle into awe. The turning point in Maya Hernandez's journey wasn't a number in her account. It was the moment she realized that freedom was possible, and that her life could be designed, not endured. She had spent years subtracting, cutting, saving, saying no. Now, she was ready to add, to imagine, to live. The countdown had begun, and the finish line was closer than she had ever dared to believe. By the time Maya turned 38, the countdown had taken on a life of its own. 2 years. Just 2 more years until she would do the unthinkable, step away from nursing. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. The number wasn't abstract anymore. Her investments had crossed 700,000. Her emergency fund was fully stocked. Her lifestyle was dialed into 30,000 a year, and she knew she could live within that boundary. And yet, those last 2 years were the hardest. Because the closer she got, the louder the doubts became. At work, the pushback escalated. Her coworkers, who had long teased her for her frugality, now sensed something different. They noticed the quiet confidence in her eyes, the way she no longer seemed chained to the hospital like the rest of them. One evening, During a particularly hectic shift, a nurse named Carla cornered her in the supply room. "Be honest, Maya. You're not really going to quit at 40, are you?" Maya hesitated. She hadn't spoken her plan aloud to many people. But something in Carla's tone wasn't curiosity. It was challenge. "You've worked too hard to just stop," Carla pressed. "Think of the pension. Think of the benefits. Nobody walks away from this kind of security." Maya smiled gently. "I'm not walking away from security. I'm walking toward it." Carla shook her head, unconvinced. "You'll regret it. You'll be bored. You'll run out of money." The words stung, not because Maya believed them, but because they echoed her own late-night fears. At family gatherings, the resistance was subtler but just as sharp. Her parents, immigrants who had worked labor jobs until their bodies gave out, couldn't understand. "Mija," her father said once, over a plate of tamales. "Work is life. You stop working, what's left?" Her mother chimed in. "And what about security? What about when you're old? We worked until we couldn't. That's just how it is." Maya wanted to explain that she wasn't rejecting their values. She was honoring them. That she had seen their exhaustion, their pain, and promised herself she would not repeat it. But instead, she just said, "I'll be okay." They nodded, but their eyes betrayed doubt. The hardest doubts came not from others, but from herself. At night, lying in bed, Maya's mind became a battlefield. What if the market crashes right after I retire? What if 30,000 isn't enough? What if I get sick? What if I get lonely? What if I regret it all? The questions swirled, relentless. Some nights, she reassured herself with math. She ran projections, tested withdrawal rates, reminded herself of her buffers. Numbers were her shield. Other nights, she fought with memory. She replayed the exhaustion of 24-hour shifts, the suffocating debt, the endless treadmill of spend, work, repeat. Those memories became her reminder, never again. But doubt never fully left. It lingered like a shadow, testing her resolve. To fight it, Maya doubled down on discipline. She tracked every expense with almost surgical precision. Every dollar was accounted for, every choice deliberate. She wasn't just saving money anymore. She was proving to herself that she could live her retirement budget today. When coworkers ordered takeout, she reheated her lentils. When friends booked vacations, she took long walks in the park. When ads promised happiness for the price of convenience, she closed her laptop and picked up a library book. Each small choice was a rehearsal for freedom. But even as she resisted spending, Maya realized she had to practice something harder, learning to let go. For years, her identity had been built around nursing, around the long shifts, the scrubs, the constant giving of herself. If she walked away at 40, who would she be? The question haunted her. To prepare, she began to explore. She took weekend courses in community health, volunteered at a food pantry, joined a local hiking group. She discovered new parts of herself: the teacher, the gardener, the storyteller. Each discovery eased her fear. She began to see that retirement wasn't an end, but a chance to grow into someone she hadn't had time to become. The last year before her retirement was the most surreal. Her net worth crossed 800,000. Then 9. Her notebook showed a future that once seemed impossible. And yet, each day she still put on scrubs, still clocked in, still pushed stretchers down hallways. Her co-workers continued their jokes. "When you're rich, don't forget us," one said. Maya smiled but stayed silent. They didn't understand. She wasn't chasing riches. She was chasing time. 3 months before her 40th birthday, she faced her biggest test. Her hospital offered her promotion, head nurse of her unit. Higher salary, more prestige, more responsibility. It was everything she had once wanted. Recognition, security, validation. She asked for a night to think it over. At home, she stared at the offer letter, heart pounding. The salary was tempting. The title carried weight. But then she imagined it. More meetings, more stress, more bureaucracy, more years tied to a system she longed to escape. She closed her eyes and pictured the garden she wanted to grow, the books she wanted to read, the mornings she wanted to wake without an alarm. She set the letter down and whispered, "No." It was the hardest, most liberating decision of her life. The final months ticked by in a blur. 2 months. 1 month. 2 weeks. Her countdown, once private, became a steady hum in her chest. Every shift felt like the last lap of a marathon. Exhausting, but exhilarating. And finally, on the eve of her 40th birthday, she stood in her kitchen once more. Notebook open, pen in hand, calculator glowing. Her net worth had crossed 1 million. She stared at the number, tears filling her eyes. She had done it. The countdown was over. The narrator's voice would crescendo here, both tender and triumphant. Maya Hernandez's countdown years were not defined by wealth, but by resolve. By every small choice to resist the pressure of a world built on consumption. By every quiet no that led to a louder yes. By the courage to hold the line, even when fear and doubt screamed otherwise. The finish line was not just a number. It was a promise kept, to herself, to her past, to her future. And now, as she stepped into 40, she carried not just savings in her account, but time in her hands. The time to live. The night before her final shift, Maya sat in silence. Her apartment, the same modest one-bedroom she had rented for over a decade, felt different that evening. The walls seemed to breathe with her, the hum of the refrigerator steady, the ticking of the clock louder than usual. Her scrubs, folded neatly on the chair, waited for her. Navy blue, simple, worn soft from years of washing. Tomorrow would be the last time she wore them. The thought should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. She whispered to herself, "This is it. Tomorrow, you leap." The morning of her final shift dawned like any other, yet every detail felt magnified. The walk to her car was quieter. The steering wheel, cool beneath her hands, seemed to hold memory. She parked in the same hospital lot she had parked in for nearly 2 decades, staring at the building that had defined so much of her life. Inside, the familiar smell of antiseptic and coffee hit her. The hum of machines, the echo of overhead announcements, the rhythm of hurried footsteps. But today, everything carried weight. Every hallway whispered, "Remember me." Every patient's face seemed etched in sharper detail. Every beep of a monitor carried both urgency and farewell. Her coworkers greeted her, as usual, though some knew. The rumor had spread, Maya was leaving. Some offered hugs. Some offered confusion. A few disbelief. "You're really doing this?" one asked, eyes wide. At 40. Another said, almost accusing, "Must be nice," someone muttered under their breath. Maya smiled through it all. She didn't defend, didn't justify. She simply said, "It's time." The shift itself was unremarkable, yet unforgettable. She charted vitals, administered medications, calmed anxious families, comforted patients in pain. The work was the same, but her perspective had shifted. Each task, once routine, now felt like a ritual of closure. When she adjusted a patient's pillow, she thought, "This is the last time." When she silenced an alarm, she thought, "The last time." When she scribbled notes into a chart, she thought, "The last time." By evening, her body ached in familiar ways. The heaviness in her legs, the stiffness in her back, the fog in her head. But this time, she smiled, because she knew it would be the last time her body bore this weight. Near the end of the shift, she slipped into the supply closet, the same cramped room where she had once cried over $183 in her account. She leaned against the shelves, closed her eyes, and let the memories flood. The exhaustion, the debt, the ridicule, the years of beans and rice, the lonely nights, the relentless no's, and then, the victories, the debt-free night, the first 5-figure investment, the 6-figure milestone, the million. Tears filled her eyes. She wasn't just leaving a job. She was leaving a version of herself behind. When the shift ended, she changed out of her scrubs slowly, folding them carefully, as if honoring an old friend. She placed them in her bag, knowing she might never wear them again. Her coworkers gathered, some hugging her, some still shaking their heads. "Good luck," one said softly. "Enjoy your early retirement," another said with a mix of envy and disbelief. Maya smiled, thanked them, and walked out of the hospital for the last time. The automatic doors slid open. Cool night air hit her face. She paused on the sidewalk, staring at the building glowing against the sky. For years, it had consumed her. Now, it was just a structure of concrete and light. She whispered, "Thank you," then turned and walked away. The drive home was surreal. She expected exhilaration. Instead, she felt nothing. Or maybe everything, tangled and muted. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Each red light stretched long. Each turn felt like moving through fog. By the time she pulled in her parking lot, Her chest ached with a strange mixture of relief and grief. She sat in the car, staring at the dashboard. For years, she had dreamed of this moment, freedom. But now, faced with it, the weight was heavier than expected. Finally, she whispered, "You're free now. It's okay to feel lost." The first morning of retirement arrived quietly. No alarm jolted her awake. She stirred naturally, the sun streaming through her blinds. For a moment, habit urged her to rise, shower, dress for work. Then she remembered. There was no work. She lay in bed, listening to the sounds outside. Birds, distant traffic, the rustle of leaves. Her chest filled with something she hadn't felt in years, stillness. It was intoxicating and terrifying. She brewed coffee slowly, savoring the ritual. No rush, no clock to beat, no shift to prepare for. Just the smell of roasted beans filling her apartment. She sat at her small kitchen table, notebook open. But today, there were no budgets, no countdowns, no projections. Just a blank page. At the top, she wrote in careful letters, Day 1. Beneath it, she wrote, "What will freedom look like today?" At first, freedom felt awkward. She wandered her apartment, restless. Read a few pages of a book, then put it down. Took a walk around the block, then came back too quickly. Made lunch, ate it in silence, unsure how to fill the hours. For so long, her life had been dictated by the hospital's rhythm. Now, the absence of structure felt like a void. But slowly, the void began to feel like space. In the afternoon, she sat by her window with a journal, writing for the first time in years about dreams beyond money. She wrote about learning to garden, about traveling to national parks, about volunteering at free clinics, about teaching financial literacy to young nurses. The page filled quickly, her pen racing to keep up with her imagination. For the first time, she realized her life wasn't ending. It was beginning. Over the next days, the weight began to lift. She slept deeply, her body repairing years of fatigue. She cooked with joy, experimenting with flavors she never had time for. She met a friend for a slow walk in the park, marveling how different conversation felt without exhaustion hanging over her. The world seemed brighter, colors sharper, air cleaner. Or maybe it was just her eyes, unclouded by burnout. Freedom wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, gentle, a slow unfurling. The narrator's voice would soften here, reflective yet powerful. The leap Maya Hernandez took was not a leap into wealth, but into courage. Into mornings without alarms. Into days without debt. Into a life measured not in shifts worked, but in hours truly lived. Her leap was not about escaping nursing, but about claiming time, the most precious currency of all. And, as she stepped into her first days of retirement, she discovered a truth she had always suspected. Freedom is not loud. It is quiet. It is not dramatic. It is steady. It is not given. It is built. And Maya had built it, one choice at a time. The first week of retirement felt like a dream. Maya woke without alarms, stretched in sunlit sheets, lingered over coffee with the luxury of silence. She wandered through parks in the middle of the day, where joggers and young mothers moved at a pace foreign to her working life. She devoured books that had sat untouched for years. She called it her honeymoon with freedom. But like all honeymoons, it didn't last. By the second week, the novelty wore thin. The quiet became loud. Without 12-hour shifts, without endless charts and monitors and alarms, the days stretched open, vast and uncertain. Maya found herself pacing her apartment, restless. She washed dishes that were already clean, rearranged books she didn't plan to read, checked her investment accounts 3 times a day, as though watching numbers would give her direction. She had fought for this freedom. Yet now, with it in her hands, she asked herself, what am I supposed to do? The adjustment wasn't just practical. It was emotional. For nearly 2 decades, she had introduced herself with pride. I'm a nurse. It was more than a job. It was her identity. Now, when new acquaintances asked what she did, she hesitated. I used to be a nurse, she said. Then quickly added, but I retired early. The words felt strange, almost fraudulent. How could she be retired at 40? Retired was for 65, for silver hair and rocking chairs. Her parents struggled most with the shift. At family dinners, her mother frowned. You're too young to sit around doing nothing. Her father asked, when are you going back to work? No matter how often Maya explained, her savings, her budget, her plan. They shook their heads, unconvinced. To them, work was survival. To stop was to risk everything. Maya didn't argue. She simply smiled and said, "I'm not doing nothing. I'm learning how to live." In truth, the adjustment tested her more than she had anticipated. Her budget was solid. $30,000 a year. Rent, groceries, modest healthcare premiums, a cushion for extras. The math worked. But the math didn't prepare her for the emotions. Some days she felt euphoric, walking through farmers' markets at 10 in the morning, journaling at noon, cooking elaborate dinners without exhaustion. Other days, she felt adrift. Without the urgency of nursing, her life lacked adrenaline. Without coworkers, she felt lonely. Without structure, she felt untethered. The paradox of freedom revealed itself. When all hours are yours, you must decide how to spend them. And that was harder than she expected. So Maya experimented. She treated her days like research, testing rhythms until something clicked. Mornings became sacred. She walked at sunrise, journaled with coffee, then tackled reading or writing. Afternoons she reserved for movement, yoga, hiking, volunteering. Evenings she spent with family or friends, or simply cooking and reflecting. It wasn't a rigid schedule, but a framework, enough to give her life shape without the suffocation of shifts. Slowly, the restlessness eased. Volunteering became her anchor. She signed up at a community clinic, offering a few hours a week. Unlike the hospital, there were no endless charts, no corporate mandates, no crushing overtime. Just people in need, grateful for her time. One afternoon, she helped an elderly woman manage her medications. The woman squeezed her hand, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you, Mija. You didn't have to be here." Maya smiled, heart swelling. "I chose to be here," she thought. That was the difference. Nursing had once been obligation. Now, service was choice. And in that choice, she rediscovered her love for the craft. Her social circle shifted too. Some friends drifted away, still consumed by their careers. They couldn't understand why Maya declined expensive dinners or weekday cocktails. But others drew closer. A cousin who wanted to learn budgeting. A younger nurse curious about investing. A neighbor who joined her on morning walks. Her relationships became fewer, but deeper, rooted not in shared consumption, but in shared growth. Financially, the adjustment tested her discipline. The temptation to live it up after years of frugality was strong. Ads whispered of vacations, cars, luxury goods. Friends encouraged her to treat yourself. You deserve it. But Maya reminded herself, she hadn't sacrificed to splurge. She had sacrificed to sustain. She allowed herself small joys, a weekend trip to the mountains, fresh produce from the market, a secondhand guitar she had always wanted to learn. But the foundation remained the same: intentional living, deliberate spending, values over vanity. Her expenses stayed within $30,000. Her investments continued to grow, even as she withdrew carefully. Each month, she smiled at her spreadsheet. Freedom wasn't draining her. It was fueling her. Still, the adjustment wasn't without setbacks. One month, her car needed a costly repair. Another, her health insurance premium increased. At first, panic surged, old fears of scarcity returning. But then she looked at her emergency fund, untouched and waiting. She paid the bills calmly, grateful she had prepared. The scares reminded her, financial freedom didn't mean problems disappeared. It meant she had the resilience to face them without panic. Perhaps the most surprising part of her adjustment was how time changed. When she worked, weeks blurred in exhaustion. Mondays bled into Fridays. Months vanished in a haze of shifts. Now, time expanded. Days felt longer, richer. Seasons became vivid: spring blossoms, summer storms, autumn leaves, winter stillness. She noticed details she had once rushed past: the laughter of children in the park, the way light shifted through her window, the sound of rain tapping against her roof. Time, she realized, was the true wealth she had bought. The first year ended not with fanfare, but with quiet contentment. On the anniversary of her retirement, Maya returned to the kitchen table where her journey had turned, the place where she had once circled numbers with trembling hands. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, Year 1. Beneath it, she listed not numbers but moments. Morning walks, volunteering smiles, family dinners, books devoured, Meals cooked with joy. Silences embraced. Her eyes filled with tears as she read the list. She had worried retirement would feel empty. Instead, it felt full, not of things but of life. The narrator's voice would soften here, reflective but firm. The adjustment to freedom is not instant. It is not a straight line from exhaustion to joy. It is awkward, uneasy, filled with questions of identity and purpose. But in that uncertainty lies discovery. Maya Hernandez discovered that freedom is not about escaping work. It is about choosing what work is worth your time. It is not about abundance of money, but abundance of moments. It is not about having everything, but about needing little. And in her first year of retirement, she proved something vital. Financial freedom is not the end of story. It is the beginning of one. At first, Maya imagined retirement would free her not only from work, but from judgment. But she soon learned, when you live differently, the world notices. And not always kindly. The first ripples came from family. Her parents, still uneasy with her decision, shared their worries with relatives. At gatherings, whispers circulated. Did you hear? Maya quit her job. At 40. She thinks she can live on nothing. She's crazy. She should be saving more, not working less. Maya heard the words in fragments, caught in hushed tones across tables, woven into conversations that quieted when she entered the room. She smiled politely, but inside, the comments stung. Her friends were no gentler. One afternoon, she met her old nursing colleague Carla for coffee. Carla sipped her latte, leaned forward, and said, "I just don't get it. You gave up a stable career for what? To sit at home." Maya inhaled, choosing her words carefully. Not to sit at home. To live on my own terms. Carla frowned. But you had benefits. Security. You'll regret this when you're older. Maya stirred her tea, steady. Maybe. Or maybe I'll regret spending my healthiest years chained to a job I didn't love. Carla shook her head, unconvinced. The conversation lingered between them like static, unresolved. The criticisms didn't stop at personal circles. When a local community magazine ran a small feature about her, the nurse who retired at 40, the story spread. Online, the comments multiplied. She must have had rich parents. Bet she married a millionaire. This is irresponsible. No one can live on 30 grand a year forever. Lazy. Freeloading. Must be nice. Maya scrolled through them one night, heart sinking. She had expected doubt. She hadn't expected hostility. Strangers who knew nothing of her sacrifices, her lentils, her sleepless nights of debt, reduced her story to luck or foolishness. Her chest tightened. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm reckless. Maybe I don't deserve this. The doubts she thought she had conquered resurfaced, sharper now in other people's voices. But then, buried among the negativity, she found other comments. I'm a nurse too, and I've been dreaming of this. How did she do it? Her story gives me hope. Maybe I don't have to work until 65. I'm in debt right now, but reading this makes me want to start budgeting. Maya's eyes filled with tears. For every critic, there was someone quietly inspired. For every voice that doubted her, another whispered, maybe me too. That realization shifted something inside her. She couldn't control the critics, but she could choose who she listened to. So she began to speak more openly, not to defend herself, not to prove the critics wrong, but to share what was possible. She started small, writing blog posts about frugality, side hustles, investing basics. She spoke at a local library about financial independence. She mentored a handful of young nurses, showing them her spreadsheets, her methods, her mistakes. She told her story not as a prescription, but as proof. This is one path. It's not easy. It's not quick, but it is possible. The more she spoke, the more she realized her story wasn't about her anymore. It was about anyone willing to question the script society handed them. Still, the critics remained. At holiday dinners, relatives teased her. How's retirement treating you, lazybones? On social media, skeptics insisted she would crawl back to work when money ran out. Even strangers in casual conversation raised eyebrows when she said she didn't work. Each comment was a test, a chance to doubt herself again. But Maya learned resilience. She stopped trying to explain herself to those who didn't want to understand. She stopped justifying her choices to people invested in the old script. Instead, she let her life speak for itself. When people saw her peace, her health, her steady finances, her joy, some grew quieter. Others grew curious. One day, she ran into an old patient's daughter at the market. "You're Nurse Hernandez, right?" the woman asked, eyes lighting up. "You took care of my father years ago." Maya smiled warmly. "Yes, I remember him." The woman tilted her head. "So what do you do now?" For a moment, Maya hesitated, the old awkwardness rising. Then she stood tall. "I live simply," she said, "and I teach people about money." The woman's eyes widened with respect. "That's amazing." Maya walked away smiling. It wasn't about titles anymore. It was about truth. The critics never disappeared, but they lost their power. Because Maya had learned something vital. Criticism often says more about the critic than the criticized. People who called her lazy feared slowing down themselves. People who called her reckless feared confronting their own finances. People who dismissed her as lucky didn't want to face the discipline she had lived. Their words weren't her burden to carry. The narrator's voice here would sharpen, offering a lesson. When you choose a path different from the world will resist you. It will mock, question, doubt. But progress has always looked like rebellion to those unwilling to change. Maya Hernandez learned that critics are inevitable, but freedom is worth the noise. She didn't silence the critics. She outlived them. And in doing so, she discovered that the loudest voices were rarely the truest. The truest voices were the quiet ones, the inspired ones, the ones who whispered, "Maybe me too." It began with a single question. Maya was at the community clinic one afternoon, stocking supplies, when a young nurse named Elena pulled her aside. "I heard you retired," Elena whispered, as if the word itself were dangerous. Maya chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it." Elena's eyes were wide, equal parts awe and desperation. "How?" "I'm drowning. Between student loans, rent, car payments, I can't imagine ever getting out." Maya saw herself in those eyes. The exhaustion, the quiet panic, the sense of being trapped. She thought of her own nights crying in supply closets, the taste of lentils, the weight of debt. And in that moment, she realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It could be a map for others. At first, she resisted. She wasn't a financial expert. She wasn't a guru. She was just a nurse who had chosen discipline over indulgence. But Elena kept asking questions. And so did others. A neighbor, a cousin, a friend of a friend who had read about her online. Slowly, Maya began to share. Not with flashy slogans or promises of quick wealth, but with honesty. She told them about the nights she ate beans and rice, about the ridicule she faced, about the notebook filled with budgets and goals, about the joy of saying no to things she didn't need so she could say yes to freedom. People listened, really listened, because she wasn't speaking theory. She was speaking life. Soon, word spread. The local library invited her to give a talk. Just 20 people in a small room, folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Maya stood at the front, palms sweating, heart pounding. She had never been a public speaker, but when she looked out and saw the faces, tired, anxious, hopeful, her nerves melted. She told them her story, not as a blueprint, but as proof. "You don't need a high income," she said. "You need intention. Every dollar is a choice. Every choice is a step. Small steps add up. I promise you, I started with nothing, and I built freedom." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. A woman in the front row wiped tears from her eyes. A man at the back raised his hand and said, "You just gave me hope I haven't felt in years." Maya walked home that night glowing. For the first time, she understood. Her freedom wasn't the end of her purpose. It was the beginning of a new one. The requests multiplied. A community center asked her to run a workshop. A local radio station wanted an interview. Nurses from her old hospital messaged her privately, begging for advice. Maya embraced it. Not as a job. She wasn't chasing income, but as a calling. She created handouts on budgeting basics. She explained the envelope method, the snowball debt strategy, the power of low-cost index funds. She showed them her own spreadsheets, her own mistakes, her own victories. People were hungry for simplicity, for authenticity, and Maya gave it freely. One young nurse, Jamal, became her most eager student. He was 26, drowning in loans, working double shifts. He admitted he spent recklessly to cope. Take-out meals, expensive sneakers, weekend trips. "I feel like I'm working just to survive," he confessed, shoulders slumped. Maya didn't lecture. She simply asked, What do you really want? He hesitated, then whispered, freedom. So she showed him. They sat at her kitchen table for hours, poring over his numbers. She helped him build his first budget, taught him to automate savings, challenged him to track every expense for 30 days. At first, he resisted. Old habits pulled at him. But slowly, change took root. Months later, Jamal returned, grinning. I paid off my first loan, and I've got an emergency fund now. Maya beamed. The pride in his eyes was the same pride she had once felt. In that moment, she realized the joy of financial freedom doubled when shared. But mentoring wasn't just about money. People came to her not only with budgets, but with fear. Fear of never escaping debt. Fear of disappointing families. Fear of being different. Maya listened. She held their stories with care. She reminded them that their worth was not tied to their paychecks, that their choices mattered more than their critics, that small victories were victories still. She taught them resilience as much as she taught them finance, because she knew the hardest part wasn't math. It was mindset. The critics still appeared, of course. Some scoffed at her talks. It's not realistic, they said. Most people can't live like that. Maya didn't argue. She knew not everyone would follow her path. But for those who wanted it, she would be there. And for every skeptic, 10 more showed gratitude. A single mother who saved her first $500. A retiree who downsized and found peace. A college student who avoided loans by budgeting early. These stories became her fuel. Proof that the seeds she planted were growing. Her purpose deepened. She began to see her life in 2 chapters. Chapter 1. The nurse who survived by serving others in hospitals. Chapter 2. The mentor who thrived by serving others in freedom. Both were about healing. One healed bodies. The other healed relationships with money. And both gave her life meaning. On the anniversary of her second retirement year, Maya gathered with some of her mints in the community center. They surprised her with a small celebration, a potluck dinner, laughter filling the room. Elena, the young nurse who had first asked, stood and raised a glass. You showed us what's possible, not just with money, but with courage. You changed our lives. Maya's eyes welled with tears. She looked around the room, at Jamal, at Elena, at the single mother, at the retirees. Her heart swelled. She had thought retirement would be an escape. Instead, it had become an expansion. Not less life. More life. Not the end of work. The beginning of meaningful work. Not just freedom for herself. Freedom shared. The narrator's voice would rise here, both triumphant and tender. Maya Hernandez's journey did not end with financial freedom. It blossomed into something greater. For freedom, once earned, becomes more powerful when given. She became not just a nurse of the body, but a nurse of the spirit. Not just a survivor of the rat race, but a mentor to those still running. Her life proved that financial independence is not selfish. It is a gift of example, of guidance, of hope. And in giving that gift, Maya discovered the deepest wealth of all, purpose. For 2 years, Maya's life had flowed in a rhythm of quiet contentment. Her days were steady, mornings of walks and journaling, afternoons of mentoring and volunteering, evenings of cooking and community. Her finances ticked along as planned. Her investments grew modestly. Her withdrawals remained measured. She had begun to believe, perhaps too easily, that the hardest part was behind her. But life, she soon learned, has a way of testing even the best-laid plans. The first tremor came from the markets. One morning, she brewed her coffee, opened her laptop, and frowned. Her index fund portfolio, the very nest egg she had built with relentless discipline, had dropped. Not by a little, by tens of thousands. The headlines screamed, markets plunge, recession fears, investors panic. Maya's chest tightened. She scrolled through graphs of plunging lines, numbers bleeding red. For years, she had prepared for this. She had read the books, listened to the podcasts, studied the cycles. Stay the course, they all said. Don't panic. The market always recovers. But knowing something intellectually and living it emotionally are 2 very different things. She felt her heart race. What if it doesn't recover? What if I retire too early? What if my money isn't enough? The old fear returned. The supply closet fear, the $183 in the bank fear. She hadn't felt it in years. Now it roared back, sharper than ever. For days, she checked her accounts obsessively. Each time, the numbers mocked her. Lower, lower, lower. She imagined herself forced back into scrubs, begging for shifts, explaining to everyone that her dream had failed. The shame would be unbearable. One night, unable to sleep, she sat at her kitchen table, head in her hands. The same place where her journey had begun years earlier. Back then, she had nothing but debt and desperation. Now, she had freedom, but she feared losing it all. Then she opened her old notebook, the one filled with budgets, goals, sacrifices. She flipped through the pages, seeing her own handwriting from years past. Emergency fund, $1,000. Debt-free balance, $0 owed. First $100,000 invested, $1 million. Freedom number. Each line told a story of persistence. Each milestone was proof that she had faced fear before and overcome it. Slowly, her breathing steadied. She whispered aloud, as if reminding herself, "You built this for storms. This is the storm, and you are ready." She returned to basics. She stopped looking at her portfolio daily. She reminded herself that she wasn't withdrawing recklessly, only the small, steady amount she had planned. She remembered that downturns were part of the cycle. And most importantly, she leaned on perspective. She thought of her patients, people fighting for their health, for their lives. She thought of her younger self, working double shifts, drowning in debt. Compared to those battles, a red line on a chart was survivable. The market would recover. And even if it didn't as quickly as hoped, she had prepared for lean years. She closed the laptop, exhaled deeply, and let it go. But just as her confidence began to return, a new challenge emerged: inflation. Prices crept higher at the grocery store. Gas ticked upward at the pump. Even her modest rent rose. Her careful $30,000 a year budget stretched thin. At first, she tried to ignore it. A few extra dollars here, a few there. But soon, the numbers told the truth. Her expenses were climbing faster than expected. The fear whispered again. What if your plan breaks? What if you outlive your money? Maya considered cutting back even more. Fewer outings, less fresh food, smaller giving. But the thought depressed her. She hadn't retired to start joy, so she adapted differently. She took on a small paid workshop at the library. She freelanced a few hours, editing health-related articles online. She didn't need the money, but the trickle of income eased her anxiety. More importantly, it reminded her, freedom didn't mean never working again. It meant never having to work again. And that distinction gave her peace. Just when she felt steadier, another test arrived. One morning, she woke with a sharp pain in her side. At first, she dismissed it, probably something she ate. But when it persisted, she grew uneasy. For years, she had lived with the security of employer-provided health insurance. Now, her coverage was lean, chosen carefully for cost. She worried, what if this is serious? What if my medical bills wipe out everything I built? The fear was suffocating. At the clinic, she sat in the waiting room, hands trembling. She remembered her patients' faces, the diagnoses that had shattered lives. What if I become the patient now? Tests were run. Hours dragged. Her mind spun with worst-case scenarios. Finally, the doctor returned with a gentle smile. It's nothing major, he assured. A minor infection. We'll treat it easily. Relief flooded her body, so strong she nearly cried. But the scare lingered. She realized her plan had accounted for budgets, markets, and inflation, but not for the raw fear of health fragility. She couldn't control aging. She couldn't control every diagnosis. But she could control preparation. So she revised her plan. She boosted her health savings account. She adjusted her emergency fund. She researched long-term care options early. The scare became a lesson. Freedom isn't the absence of risk. It's the resilience to face risk without collapse. These three storms, the market drop, inflation, the health scare, left her shaken, but not broken. They reminded her that financial freedom was not a finish line. It was a practice, a way of living with vigilance, humility, and adaptability. And though the doubts had returned, they also deepened her confidence. Because each time, she had faced fear. Each time, she had found her footing. Each time, she had chosen resilience. The narrator's voice would rise here, reflective and firm. The path to financial freedom does not end with wealth. It continues through storms. Maya Hernandez learned that markets fall, prices rise, health falters, fear whispers. But none of these undo freedom. Because freedom is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the presence of preparation. It is the choice to bend without breaking. It is the strength to say, I have faced worse. I will face this too. And with each storm, Maya's freedom grew not weaker, but stronger. There was a moment, quiet and ordinary, when Maya understood the word enough. It wasn't in the bank. It wasn't her spreadsheets. It wasn't when she hit her freedom number. It was on a breezy afternoon in her small kitchen, slicing ripe tomatoes from the farmer's market, sunlight spilling across the counter. She sprinkled salt, drizzled oil, tasted the first bite, and paused. It was simple. It was delicious. It was enough. And for the first time in her life, she didn't crave more. For years, her mind had been dominated by numbers. How much debt left? How much to save? How much to cut? To stretch? To sacrifice? Even after retirement, numbers had haunted her. Portfolio balances, withdrawal rates, inflation rates. But gradually, as the storms passed and her life steadied, something shifted. The numbers mattered, yes, but they weren't the heart of freedom. The heart was learning the power of enough. Enough meant walking to the park instead of flying abroad. Enough meant coffee brewed at home, savored slowly. Enough meant meals cooked with love, not ordered in haste. Enough meant conversations with friends under the stars, no bill to split at the end. Enough was not lack. Enough was abundance, measured differently. She realized, for years, society had sold her more. More income, more possessions, more status. And she had believed it. But freedom whispered a different truth. Less is plenty, if you know how to see it. Maya began to simplify. She decluttered her apartment, donating clothes she hadn't worn in years, books she knew she'd never read again, gadgets gathering dust. The process was slow, deliberate, sometimes emotional. Each item carried a story, a blouse bought in guilt, a kitchen tool purchased in impulse, a stack of unopened mail that once made her stomach knot with anxiety. She let them go, one by one. Her apartment grew lighter. Her mind grew clearer. In their place, she kept only what mattered. A handful of clothes she loved, shelves of books she actually read, photos of family, her trusty backpack. She discovered that minimalism wasn't about deprivation. It was about liberation. Every object gone was one less burden, one less distraction. And in the empty spaces, she found peace. Her days grew slower, too. Without shifts, without alarms, without the frantic pace of consumer life, she leaned into stillness. She walked more. She noticed the colors of leaves, the sound of birds, the way children laughed on playgrounds. She sat in parks with nothing but her journal. She watched the sky change from blue to gold to indigo. She realized she had once rushed through life as though it were an emergency. Now, she savored it as though it were a gift. Time itself became her wealth, the most precious currency she had ever earned. Her relationships deepened as well. She no longer needed to meet friends at expensive restaurants or loud bars. Instead, she invited them over for home-cooked meals or met them in the park for walks. The conversations ran longer, richer, freed from the noise of distraction. She reconnected with her niece, teaching her simple recipes. She visited her parents more often, helping them declutter, showing them that peace didn't come from accumulation, but from letting go. One evening, sitting on the porch with her father, he admitted softly, "I didn't understand why you quit. But I see you now. You're happier. And that makes me proud." Tears welled in Maya's eyes. It was the validation she hadn't known she still craved. The joy of enough spread into every corner of her life. She planted herbs on her balcony. She learned to repair instead of replace. She wrote letters by hand instead of endless emails. She rediscovered the guitar she had bought secondhand and let music fill her evenings. Each act was small, but together they formed a mosaic of contentment. And with each day, she realized she wasn't just surviving on $30,000 a year. She was thriving. But living with enough didn't mean her life was free of temptation. The world still shouted for more. Ads still promised happiness in packages. Friends still posted glossy photos of luxury vacations. Sometimes, envy flickered. Sometimes, doubt whispered, "Shouldn't you want more?" But then she returned to her balcony, to her tomatoes, to her journals, to her laughter with friends. And she remembered, she already had everything she needed. More would not add to her life. It would dilute it. The narrator's voice would soften here, almost meditative. There's a moment in the journey to freedom when the pursuit of more ends and the acceptance of enough begins. For Maya Hernandez, that moment changed everything. She learned that enough was not the bare minimum. It was not a cage. It was not a compromise. Enough was wealth in disguise. Enough was peace disguised as simplicity. Enough was freedom, fully realized. One evening, she wrote in her journal, "I used to think money was the key to freedom. Now I see, money only opened the door. Enough is what lets me walk through it." The following spring, she led a group hike for her mints. As they reached the summit, overlooking rolling hills and distant city lights, Elena, the young nurse who had first asked her how she retired, turned and said, "You always seem so at peace. What's your secret?" Maya smiled, the wind tugging at her hair. "My secret," she repeated. "Enough." The group fell silent, letting the words settle. Enough. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't marketable. But it was true. They hiked down in silence, each person carrying the word like a lantern. And Maya carried it too, not as a lesson to teach, but as a truth to live. The joy of enough was not about numbers, but about perspective. Not about scarcity, but about gratitude. Not about having less, but about needing less. And once you understood that, you were free forever. The narrator's voice would close the scene with calm conviction. In a world that chases more, Maya Hernandez chose enough. And in that choice, she discovered joy richer than wealth, time fuller than schedules, and peace deeper than numbers. Her story reminds us, financial freedom is not the finish line. It is the space where joy is found in enough. And that joy is the truest freedom of all. Maya once believed her journey was solitary. She had pictured herself as an outlier, a nurse who stumbled into freedom by living oddly frugal, who carried notebooks full of numbers while her peers carried credit cards. But slowly, she began to realize she was not alone. It started with an online forum. Late one night, while reading about index funds, she clicked into a thread titled, "How I Retired at 38. She scrolled, fascinated. Story after story appeared. Teachers, engineers, baristas, single parents, all describing how they had saved, invested, downsized, and broken free from the grind. The words leapt off the screen. "I thought I was crazy until I found you all. We're not rich. We're intentional. Freedom is the real luxury." Maya felt a shock of recognition. These strangers, scattered across the globe, were speaking her language. For the first time, she didn't feel like an oddity. She felt like part of a movement. She lurked at first, reading silently, absorbing strategies and philosophies. Some people lived in vans. Others built rental property portfolios. Some pursued side hustles aggressively. Others embraced radical frugality. The diversity of paths astonished her. Yet beneath the surface differences lay a shared heartbeat, the belief that life was too precious to trade endlessly for money. It was intoxicating. Eventually, she introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Maya. I was a nurse for 18 years. I retired at 40. I live on about $30,000 a year. Excited to meet others on this path." The replies poured in. "Welcome, Maya. Amazing story. A nurse. We need more healthcare voices here. Tell us your top tips for living on 30K. She laughed aloud, alone in her apartment, at the warmth of strangers. For the first time, she didn't have to defend herself. She didn't have to explain. She belonged. Soon, her online connections spilled into real life. A post announced a local meetup of fire enthusiasts at a park. Maya hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to reveal herself to actual people. What if they judged her? But curiosity tugged stronger than fear. That Saturday, she packed homemade snacks and walked to the park. She spotted them immediately. A small group gathered at picnic tables, laptops open, notebooks out, laughter carrying in the breeze. They waved her over. Introductions were casual, but the energy was electric. An IT worker who had paid off his mortgage early. A couple who house-hacked by renting out half their duplex. A young teacher determined to save 50% of her income. As Maya shared her own story, their eyes lit with recognition. "You retire at 40? That's incredible. You did it on a nurse's salary? Even better. Tell us everything." The conversation flowed for hours. They swapped tips on budgeting apps, low-cost travel hacks, sustainable living practices. They debated withdrawal strategies and healthcare solutions. But beneath the spreadsheets and strategies, Maya felt something deeper: solidarity. Here were people who didn't think she was crazy, who didn't mock her beans and rice years, who didn't envy her freedom but celebrated it. Here were people who understood. Over the following months, she became a regular. She attended monthly meetups, hosted a workshop, even invited the group into her small apartment to demonstrate how she budgeted. The community grew, dozens of people, then hundreds. Some were veterans, already free. Others were just starting. But all were united by the radical idea that money was not the point of life, freedom was. Maya's own fire reignited. She realized she had spent so much energy defending her choices to critics that she had forgotten how empowering it was to build with allies. In this movement, she was not an outlier. She was part of a revolution. One day, a fellow member told her about a national financial independence conference. Thousands of people gathering for workshops, panels, and stories. Maya hesitated. It meant travel, expense, stepping into a bigger world. But she remembered her early fear of even attending a local meetup, and how transformative that had been. So she bought the ticket. The conference was overwhelming. Walking into the convention center, she saw banners reading "Financial Freedom for All" and "Redefine Retirement." Booths lined the halls, budgeting software, sustainable living startups, minimalist bookshops. In breakout rooms, she listened to talks. How I Retired at 32. Raising Kids with Financial Independence. Sustainable Frugality. Each speaker carried the same spark she had found in herself. During Q&A sessions, attendees asked questions not about luxury cars or vacation homes, but about resilience, community, and meaning. Maya's heart swelled. Here, financial freedom wasn't selfish. It was collective. It was about building a culture of enough, of purpose, of shared wisdom. On the second night, she sat in the lobby with a circle of strangers who quickly became friends. They told their stories. A single dad who paid off debt by driving for rideshare apps. A woman who grew up in poverty and now taught financial literacy to teens. A couple who built tiny homes and rented them as a side income. Maya shared her own journey, from the ICU to the $30,000 life. When she finished, one man shook his head in awe. You know, people think FIRE is about math. But really, it's about courage. And you've got it. Her eyes stung. For years, she had felt like the odd one. Now, she realized she was part of something far bigger. By the end of the conference, she was buzzing. She returned home with new friends, new tools, new ideas. More importantly, she returned with a sense of belonging she hadn't known she was missing. The movement was global, diverse, alive, and she was in it. She began to weave this wider community into her mentoring. She connected her mentor with online groups. She recommended books written by others in the FIRE world. She invited guest speakers from the community to her workshops. She stopped feeling like a lone voice. Instead, she became a bridge, connecting her local world to the wider movement. The narrator's voice here would rise, panoramic, almost epic. For Maya Hernandez, the journey to financial freedom began in solitude. One nurse, one notebook, one desperate dream. But it blossomed into something vast. She discovered that freedom is not a lonely path. It is a movement, a chorus of voices across the world, defying the rat race, rewriting the script, building lives of intention. And in joining that chorus, Maya's own voice grew stronger. Because freedom, when shared, multiplies. On her journal's last page, after the conference, she wrote, "I thought I was escaping something. But really, I was joining something. A movement, a family, a future where freedom is for everyone." The first time Maya saw her own name in print, she almost didn't believe it. A journalist had stumbled across one of her local workshops and asked if she could profile her. Maya agreed, thinking it would be a small community feature. 2 weeks later, the article appeared online. Nurse retires at 40, lives happily on $30,000 a year. It spread faster than she imagined. Emails flooded her inbox. Her phone buzzed nonstop. The workshop attendance doubled overnight. But with attention came something else. The critics returned. At first, the comments were polite skepticism. Good for her, but this isn't realistic for most people. Not everyone can live on beans and rice. She must have had help from family. Then came the sharper barbs. This is irresponsible advice. She's misleading people. No one can retire that young without being rich. Wait until inflation wipes her out. Then we'll see. And then, as the article spread to bigger platforms, came the trolls. Must be nice to mooch off society. She's lying. There's no way she did this on a nurse's salary. Probably just clickbait. Another scammer. Maya stared at the screen, stomach twisting. For years, she had endured whispers in hospital hallways, skepticism from coworkers, dismissive laughs from relatives. She thought she had grown immune. But this was different. This was thousands of strangers, faceless and relentless, judging her life with venom. It hurt, more than she wanted to admit. For days, she withdrew. She ignored her email. She skipped a meetup. She didn't log into the forum. She felt exposed, misunderstood, attacked. She replayed their words in her head. Irresponsible, unrealistic, liar. The old doubt returned. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong in the spotlight. Maybe I should just fade back into quiet anonymity. Then, one evening, she received a message from Elena, the nurse who had first asked her how she retired. Don't listen to them, Elena wrote. You changed my life. I paid off half my loans this year because of you. I'm saving more than I ever thought possible. You gave me hope. Maya's throat tightened. She remembered Jamal, grinning with his first debt-free statement. She remembered the single mom who built her emergency fund. She remembered the community circle at the conference. She remembered why she had started sharing in the first place. Not for applause. Not for articles. Not for fame. For them. The next morning, she opened her laptop and returned to the comments. This time, she read them differently. She realized something profound. Critics often speak louder than supporters. But volume isn't truth. Yes, some people dismissed her. But far more had thanked her. Far more had found value. The critics were noise. The students were signal. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered, I will not be silenced by noise. Still, she knew she had to protect herself. So she built boundaries. She stopped reading comment sections on news sites. She filtered her inbox to highlight messages from mentors and allies. She spent less time on social media, more time in person with her community. She chose not to fight every critic. She chose to invest in those who were listening. It was a conscious decision to pour her energy into growth, not defense. But backlash didn't only come from strangers. A television host invited her onto a financial talk show. Maya hesitated but agreed, thinking it might spread her message further. The interview began politely enough. But halfway through, the host leaned forward with a skeptical smile. Come on, Maya. $30,000 a year? That's poverty. Don't you feel deprived? Maya sat taller, meeting his gaze. No, she said calmly. I feel free. My life is full of joy, purpose, and peace. Deprivation is working a job you hate, spending money you don't have, and never having time for what matters. The host raised an eyebrow, but the audience applauded. Maya realized in that moment that backlash was also opportunity, an opportunity to challenge assumptions, to speak truth where myths dominated. She left the studio shaking, adrenaline coursing, but proud. She had not cowered. She had stood firm. Later that week, at her community workshop, she shared the experience with her mentors. People will tell you your dreams are impossible, she said. They'll laugh. They'll criticize. They'll doubt. But remember this. Their disbelief is not your truth. Your truth is the life you build, step by step, with intention. The room went silent. Then Elena whispered, That's exactly what I needed to hear. Maya smiled. That was enough. Over time, she came to see backlash differently. It no longer felt like an attack. It felt like confirmation. After all, movements that change the status quo always meet resistance. Skepticism was a sign she was challenging entrenched beliefs. She wrote in her journal, If everyone agrees with you, you're not doing anything radical. Resistance means you're shaking the walls of convention. Let them shake. The narrator's voice would rise here, steady and resolute. Maya Hernandez learned that financial freedom does not shield you from criticism. In fact, it invites it. Because to reject the rat race is to reject the script society has written. And scripts, when torn, always cause outrage. But she also learned that critics cannot erase truth. Trolls cannot erase transformation. Her life was proof, and no insult could undo proof. In time, she wore the backlash like armor. It reminded her of who she once was, the nurse trembling in debt, the woman mocked for her frugality. She had endured worse than words. And she knew, if she could survive the night shifts, the debt, the ridicule, she could survive this too. And so, Maya Hernandez kept speaking, kept teaching, kept mentoring. Not for the critics, not for the headlines, for the ones listening, for the ones learning, for the ones who, like her once, believed freedom was impossible until someone proved otherwise. It began with a question from her niece. They were sitting at Maya's small dining table, coloring books spread out, markers rolling between them. Her niece, Sophia, only 10 years old, looked up with wide brown eyes. "Tia," she asked, "why don't you go to work like mom and dad?" Maya froze, marker hovering in the air. How do you explain financial independence to a child? How do you put years of sacrifice and strategy into words simple enough for a 10-year-old? She smiled, leaning closer. "I worked a lot when I was younger. I saved money carefully. Now I don't have to go every day. Instead, I get to spend time with you." Sophia tilted her head. "So you're free?" Maya's chest tightened. Out of the mouths of children. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm free." That question lingered. For years, Maya had shared her story with adults, nurses, workshop attendees, conference goers. But what about children? What about teens just starting their journey? Wouldn't it be better to plant seeds early, before debt and bad habits rooted deep? She remembered herself at 18, eager, hopeful, but clueless. She had signed loan papers without understanding interest. She had swiped credit cards without grasping consequences. She had walked into the working world unprepared. What if someone had taught her then? What if she had learned earlier what money really meant? The thought burned bright. Maybe her next calling wasn't only mentoring peers. Maybe it was teaching the next generation. She began small. At family gatherings, she slipped lessons into conversations. When her nephew wanted the latest video game, she asked, "How many chores would it take to earn that?" When Sophia got birthday money, she encouraged, "What if you save half and spend half? That way you'll always have some left." The kids rolled their eyes sometimes, but Maya smiled. Seeds don't sprout in a day. Then she took it further. At the community library, she offered to run a workshop for teens. The librarian hesitated. Would young people show up for a talk on money? But on the day, 15 teens trickled in. Some dragged by parents, some curious, some skeptical. Maya stood at the front, heart pounding. She wasn't sure if she could hold their attention. She began with a question. "How many of you want to be rich someday?" Every hand shot up. She grinned. "Okay, now tell me, what does rich mean to you?" They shouted answers. "Cars. A mansion. Travel." She nodded, then leaned forward. "What if I told you rich isn't about stuff? What if rich means never worrying about bills, never being trapped in a job you hate, always having time for the people you love?" The room grew quieter. Eyes widened. "Because that," she said, "is the kind of rich I chose." She kept the lesson simple. She explained saving with a story. Imagine you plant a seed. If you eat it now, it's gone. But if you plant it, it grows into a tree. And that tree gives fruit year after year. Money is the same. If you spend it right away, it's gone. If you save and invest, it grows into something that keeps feeding you. She explained debt with another story. Imagine you borrow a toy from your friend. But every day you don't return it, you owe him 2 more toys. Soon, you can't catch up. That's how debt works. It multiplies if you ignore it. The teens nodded. They understood stories better than charts. By the end, they weren't rolling their eyes. They were leaning forward, asking questions. How much should I save for my first job? Is it bad if I buy sneakers I really want? What's the easiest way to start investing? Maya smiled. The seeds were taking root. Word spread. Soon, the library asked her to run monthly workshops. Local schools invited her to speak at assemblies. Parents requested sessions for their teenagers. Maya found herself crafting entire lessons, budgeting basics, the danger of debt, how money buys time, not things. She used metaphors, stories, games. She handed out envelopes for mock budget challenges. She showed how compounding worked by stacking pennies that grew into towers. The kids laughed, competed, learned without realizing it. And Maya discovered a new joy, teaching not just freedom, but possibility. One day, after a school session, a high school senior lingered. He shifted nervously, clutching a worn backpack. "Ms. Hernandez," he murmured, "my family doesn't have much. My parents say college is impossible. But do you think I could ever be free like you?" Maya placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Yes," she said firmly. It doesn't matter where you start. What matters is the choices you make, step by step. Save what you can. Learn all you can. Believe you can. Freedom is for everyone who chooses it. The boy's eyes glistened. He nodded, hope flickering like a flame. Maya carried that moment with her for weeks. She realized something profound. Her own freedom had been personal. It had been survival, then empowerment. But teaching the young was different. It was legacy. If even a handful of children avoided the mistakes she once made, if even a handful grew into adults unshackled from debt, her story would ripple outward. Her life would not just free her, it would free futures. Of course, there were skeptics here too. Some parents grumbled. They're too young to worry about money. Others scoffed. Kids should focus on school, not budgets. Maya disagreed. Financial literacy is life literacy, she told them. If they don't learn now, they'll learn later, the hard way. I'd rather they learn with pennies and paper than with loans and credit cards. Her conviction won some over. Not all, but enough. In her journal, she wrote, I once thought my greatest achievement was retiring early. But perhaps my greatest purpose is teaching others that they can too, before it's too late. The narrator's voice here would rise, warm and inspiring. Maya Hernandez discovered that freedom multiplies when shared early. By teaching children and teens, she wasn't just breaking the rat race for herself. She was breaking it for generations to come. Because the truest wealth is not money. It is wisdom, passed on. And every seed planted today becomes a forest of freedom tomorrow. That evening, back at her apartment, Sophia climbed on her lap. Tia, she said softly, when I grow up, I want to be free too. Maya kissed her forehead. You will be. Because you already know the secret. Freedom changes people in subtle ways. For Maya Hernandez, it didn't arrive like fireworks. It was not a sudden burst of champagne corks and confetti. Instead, it seeped into her life gradually, like sunlight spreading across a quiet room in the morning. First, freedom meant rest. She slept without alarms. She let her body heal from years of night shifts and double shifts. She woke when she wanted, not when a schedule demanded. Then, freedom meant discovery. She began to paint again, a hobby long forgotten. She read entire books in one sitting. She wandered through farmers' markets on weekdays, savoring the abundance she never had time for before. But as the months turned into years, freedom began to mean something else. Something deeper. Something more expansive. Freedom began to mean giving. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in autumn. Maya was walking home from the library, a tote bag full of budgeting guides she planned to use in her workshops. At the corner, near the bus stop, sat a woman she had seen often, bundled in coats, holding a cardboard sign. Most days, Maya hurried past, whispering apologies in her mind. She told herself the same excuses others did. I don't have cash. I already give elsewhere. I'm in a rush. But that day, she stopped. She crouched, the tote bag sliding off her shoulder, and asked gently, Hi, what's your name? The woman blinked, surprised. Few stopped long enough to ask. Marisol, she answered, her voice raspy. Maya smiled. I'm Maya. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sandwich she had packed. Would you like one? Marisol's eyes softened. She nodded, whispering, Thank you. They sat there for 15 minutes, chatting about the weather, about books Marisol used to love reading, mysteries, about how cold the nights had grown. When Maya rose to leave, Marisol smiled faintly. Thank you for seeing me, she said. Maya walked home with her heart heavy yet strangely light. She realized something she had always known but never lived. Giving wasn't just about money. It was about presence, about dignity, about slowing down long enough to recognize another human being. That night, she wrote in her journal, Wealth isn't what you have. It's what you can afford to share. From then on, she carried extra sandwiches. Sometimes fruit, sometimes a thermos of soup, sometimes a spare pair of gloves. She didn't just hand them out. She lingered, listening, sharing, laughing. Her generosity was small, invisible to most. But each encounter stitched her more deeply into the humanity around her. Meanwhile, her workshops were growing. At first, she had taught teens at the library. But word spread. Parents began approaching her afterward, asking if she could run sessions for them too. A single mother said, I want to learn what you're teaching my son. A retiree confessed, I'm 68 and I still don't understand how to budget. Maya said yes. Soon, She was running family sessions, parent sessions, even special workshops at the local women's shelter. She taught budgeting with envelopes and plain money. She explained compound interest using jars of beans that doubled each week. She showed families how to track spending with nothing more than a notebook. The participants laughed, groaned, debated, and learned. Her favorite moment came when someone's eyes lit with recognition. "You mean if I just stop paying these fees, I can save that much a year? You mean I don't need a six-figure job to build freedom? You mean I can start small, and it still matters?" Each realization was a spark, each spark a fire. But giving wasn't only about teaching. At the food bank, where she volunteered weekly, she stacked cans, sorted produce, and handed out boxes with a smile. She learned the names of families who came each week. She memorized their favorite foods, the little details that made them feel less like recipients and more like neighbors. One afternoon, a little boy hugged her legs after she slipped an extra bag of apples into his family's box. "Thank you," he whispered. Maya nearly cried. Apples weren't much, but to him, they were joy. She soon discovered that generosity multiplies. One day, she brought a few mints to volunteer with her. They stocked shelves awkwardly at first, but soon were laughing, joking, and working faster than anyone. At the end of the shift, one said, "I thought giving meant losing, but this feels like winning." Maya smiled. That was the lesson she wanted them to see. Giving doesn't empty you. It fills you. Still, not everyone understood. Some friends shook their heads. "You retired early, and now you spend your time giving things away? You could be traveling the world." Others asked bluntly, "Why don't you charge for your workshops? You could earn good money." Maya would just smile. "Because I don't need to. And because this way, no one is left out." Her life, pared down to simplicity, had given her a gift rare in modern life. She could give without needing anything in return. And that, she realized, was the truest form of wealth. But giving wasn't always easy. One winter was especially harsh. Snow piled against buildings. The cold seeped into bones. Demand at the food bank tripled. Maya worked double volunteer shifts. She cooked pots of soup and delivered them to neighbors. She gave away blankets she had once saved for emergencies. Still, it never felt enough. One night, exhausted, she scribbled in her journal, "There is always more need than I can meet. Am I fooling myself thinking this matters?" The next morning, she returned to the shelter. A young mother she had taught budgeting to weeks earlier ran up and hugged her. "I saved $300 already," she whispered. "It's the first time in my life I've had savings." "Thank you." Maya's doubts melted. Seeds mattered. Even if she couldn't solve everything, she could change something. And something was enough. She decided to make generosity intentional. Each December, she created a giving budget. Out of her $30,000 lifestyle, she carved out a few $100s just for giving. Not to institutions, but to individuals, neighbors, small acts. She called it her Joy Fund. One year, she bought art supplies for a teenage girl who dreamed of being a painter. Another year, she paid the utility bill for a struggling neighbor. Another time, she anonymously left groceries on the porch of a family going through layoffs. The amounts were small. The impact was enormous. Because giving isn't measured in size. It's measured in timing. That December, she challenged her mints. For this season, let's give experiences instead of gifts. Acts of love instead of things. They looked skeptical, but they tried. At their January meetup, they shared their stories. "I cooked my grandma's favorite meal every Sunday. I babysat for my sister so she could rest. I wrote letters to my friends telling them how much they mean to me." They were glowing. Jamal laughed. "Turns out service feels better than shopping." Maya beamed. That was the lesson. The narrator's voice here would rise, lyrical and contemplative. For Maya Hernandez, financial freedom was never the end. It was the beginning of generosity, the beginning of service, the beginning of a life that poured outward instead of inward. Because the truest wealth is not money saved, but lives touched. And Maya had discovered that enough is not just a number. It is a posture of the heart. One snowy Christmas morning, Sophia bounded into her arms with a handmade card. Inside, scrawled in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Tia, thank you for teaching me that love is better than things. You're the best gift." Maya pressed the card to her chest, tears streaming. Yes, she thought. This is wealth. This is freedom. For 3 years, Maya's life had carried the rhythm of freedom. Workshops, volunteering, long walks through her city, quiet mornings of tea and journaling. Her budget of $30,000 a year was steady, predictable, almost effortless. She knew the cadence of her expenses like the notes of a familiar song. Rent, groceries, utilities, her modest joy fund. Everything balanced. Everything flowed. And for a while, she forgot what uncertainty felt like. Until it returned. It began with a headline. Recession looms. Markets plunge. Inflation soars. Maya frowned as she read. The words were everywhere. Newspapers, online, conversations overheard at cafes. People were whispering about job losses, rising prices, shrinking savings. At first, she brushed it off. She had prepared for this. She lived frugally. She had her investments. She was safe. But then she went grocery shopping. The rice she bought every week had jumped from $12 to $18. The carton of eggs from $3 to $7. Even her beloved lentils had doubled. Her receipt that day was $20 higher than usual. The next week, it climbed again. By the third week, Maya sat at her kitchen table, calculator in hand, brows furrowed. Her monthly grocery bill had risen nearly 40%. Her rent, too, had increased, her landlord apologetic but firm. Her utilities crept higher. Her once perfect $30,000 plan was wobbling. At first, fear surged. What if my numbers don't work anymore? What if my investments shrink in this downturn? What if I miscalculated all along? The old doubts whispered again. Maybe they were right. Maybe you retired too early. Maybe this freedom isn't real. Maya lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. She remembered the exhaustion of 12-hour shifts. She imagined being forced back into scrubs, back under fluorescent lights, back to the grind she thought she had escaped forever. The fear was suffocating. But then, something shifted. One morning, she sat at her dining table with her journal. She wrote in shaky handwriting. Fear is loud, but facts are louder. And she opened her notebook. For hours, she reviewed every expense, every line item, every category. Rent, still manageable. Utilities, higher, but not catastrophic. Groceries, ballooning, but still flexible. Joy fund, discretionary. She recalculated, adjusted, cross-checked. And slowly, the panic began to ease. Her plan wasn't broken. It was challenged. There was a difference. That afternoon, she called her mints to an emergency workshop. Today, she announced, we're not talking theory. We're talking crisis. Because when the economy shifts, our mindset must shift too. They leaned in, eyes wide. She drew 2 circles on the board. One large, one small. This, she said, pointing to the large, is fear. It tells you the sky is falling, that you're doomed, that freedom is gone. She pointed to the small. This is fact. Numbers. Budgets. Reality. Fear is loud. Facts are quiet. But facts are true. Which will you listen to? The room went silent. She smiled. We're going to listen to facts. Together, they created what she called resilient budgets. They listed essentials. Food, shelter, utilities. They listed non-essentials. Dining out, subscriptions, luxuries. They role-played scenarios. What if prices rise another 20%? What if income drops? They practiced cutting, adjusting, prioritizing. Scarcity doesn't mean despair, Maya told them. It means clarity. It forces us to decide what really matters. In her own life, she made changes. She planted herbs and vegetables in pots on her balcony, laughing at her crooked tomato vines. She began bulk cooking meals, stretching ingredients with creativity. She walked instead of taking buses when weather allowed. She even let go of her joy fund for 3 months, redirecting that money into rising costs. It wasn't deprivation. It was adaptation. And as she adapted, she realized something powerful. Her years of frugality had trained her for this. While others panicked at new constraints, Maya felt oddly prepared. She had lived with less before. She could do it again. But the test wasn't only financial. One evening, her younger brother called. His voice was heavy. Maya, I lost my job. They laid off half the staff. I don't know how I'm going to pay the mortgage. Maya's chest ached. Her brother had always been skeptical of her frugal ways. He teased her for skipping dinners out, for clipping coupons. Now, he was scared, vulnerable, humbled. Without hesitation, she said, "Come over tomorrow. Bring your bills. We'll figure it out together." The next day, they sat side by side at her small dining table. Bills spread between them, debt balances glaring. He sighed. "I can't believe this is happening. I feel like a failure." Maya touched his hand gently. "You're not a failure. The system is unstable, not you. We'll make a plan." Together, they built a crisis budget. They cut non-essentials, called his bank to negotiate, and mapped out temporary gig work. When they finished, he looked at her with awe. "I don't know how you do this. You actually look calm." Maya smiled softly. "Because I've lived through worse. And because panic doesn't pay bills. Plans do." The narrator's voice here would lower, steady, reassuring. Maya Hernandez learned that true freedom isn't the absence of challenges. It's the presence of resilience. Economic storms will come. Prices will rise. Markets will fall. Jobs will disappear. But freedom isn't measured by whether storms arrive. It's measured by whether you can bend without breaking. And Maya bent. But she did not break. The hardest moment came in spring, when her landlord announced another rent increase. Maya sat in her apartment that night, lights dimmed, calculator glowing. For the first time, her budget numbers didn't fit neatly. She felt the familiar ache of fear. Then she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I chose simplicity. I can choose it again." The next morning, she walked to the community housing board. Within weeks, she had secured a smaller apartment. Humbler, yes, but sunlit, with a tiny patch of yard for her tomatoes. It wasn't what she had before, but it was enough. And enough was her anchor. By summer, as inflation began to cool, Maya reflected on the test she had endured. Her expenses had risen. Her lifestyle had shrunk. Her security had been shaken. But through it all, she had discovered something unshakable. She didn't fear loss anymore. Because loss did not mean failure. Loss meant adaptation. And adaptation meant survival. She shared this truth with her mates at their next circle. "Freedom isn't a straight line," she told them. "It's not a castle with walls that never crack. It's a boat that rides the waves. Some days the sea is calm. Some days it storms. But if you know how to sail, if you trust your boat, you keep moving." She paused, eyes shining. "And every storm you survive makes you stronger for the next one." The room was silent, heavy with meaning. Then one by one, heads nodded. They understood. The narrator's voice would rise here, solemn yet hopeful. Maya Hernandez faced her unexpected test and emerged not broken, but fortified. Her freedom was real, not because it was never challenged, but because it endured challenge. Because when fear screamed, she chose facts. When prices soared, she chose adaptation. When family struggled, she chose generosity. And that is the truest test of wealth. Not how it grows in calm, but how it survives in storm. In her journal that night, Maya wrote, "I used to believe freedom was a finish line. Now I see it as a practice, a muscle, a discipline. Each challenge is a test, and each test makes me freer." She closed the notebook, smiled, and whispered into the quiet, "I am not afraid." Maya never set out to leave a legacy. For most of her life, she had thought of legacy as something distant, reserved for celebrities, tycoons, or visionaries whose names ended up carved in stone. Legacy felt grand, unreachable, almost mythic. Her own ambitions had been simpler: to survive, to save, to escape, to breathe. But one evening, while leaving the library after a youth workshop, she overheard two teens talking in hushed, excited voices. "Man, I never thought about saving like that before," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "I'm going to start a notebook like she showed us. Maybe by the time I'm 20, I'll have enough for college." They didn't know Maya was listening. They didn't know her chest swelled with something beyond pride, something closer to awe. That night, she sat on her couch in her modest apartment, tea cooling on the table, and whispered into the quiet, "My story is living in theirs." And suddenly, she understood. Legacy isn't what you build for yourself. It's what you plan in others. From then on, Maya began to think differently about her work. Her workshops were useful, yes. Her mentoring was powerful. But they were temporary, tied to her voice, her presence, her hours. What would happen when she couldn't show up anymore? What if, one day, her voice grew too tired, her steps too slow? Would the seed she planted wither without her? She didn't want that. She wanted something that could stand on its own, something that could outlive her. She began small, as she always did. In her journal, she wrote lesson plans in detail, not just outlines, but stories, metaphors, exercises. She wrote how to explain debt to a child, how to demonstrate compound interest with pennies, how to run a budgeting game with envelopes. At first, it was just for herself, a way to stay organized. But soon, she realized she was creating a manual, a guide, a map that others could follow. Then she spoke to her mints. "I want you to teach," she said one evening. They blinked at her, surprised. "Us? We're still learning." Maya smiled. "That's the best time to teach. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be one step ahead of someone else." Nervously, they agreed. At the next library session, instead of leading, Maya sat in the back while Elena stood at the front, trembling but determined. She explained the envelope system to a group of younger teens. She stumbled over words, blushed, but kept going. When she finished, the room clapped. Maya's heart soared. This was legacy in motion. Not her voice, but voices multiplied. Over the next months, she rotated her mints into teaching roles. Jamal led a session on credit cards. Sophia, now a teenager, explained how she budgeted her allowance. Each time, Maya sat quietly in the back, beaming like a proud mother. Her legacy was no longer hers alone. It was theirs too. But Maya wanted to go further. One afternoon, she visited the community center director, an older woman named Rosa, who had admired Maya's work. "I have an idea," Maya began nervously. "What if we created a permanent program here? Something kids could attend every year. Financial literacy, practical life skills, the things schools don't always teach." Rosa leaned back, intrigued. "You mean like a curriculum?" "Yes. A program that continues whether I'm here or not. A program run by volunteers, mentors, maybe even past students." Rosa tapped her pen thoughtfully. "It would take planning, funding, consistency." Maya nodded. "I don't have wealth to give, but I have time. And I have a community. Maybe that's enough." Rosa smiled. "Maybe it is." The planning began. Maya gathered her notes, lesson plans, and ideas into binders. She organized topics by age group: money for kids, freedom for teens, budgeting for families. She recruited volunteers, former students, parents, neighbors, even a retired math teacher who loved the idea. They met weekly, refining lessons, testing games, debating approaches. The room buzzed with energy, voices overlapping, laughter spilling. Maya often sat back, marveling. This wasn't her program anymore. It was theirs. By spring, they launched the pilot, the Freedom Workshop series. Flyers went up around town. Announcements spread through schools and churches. On opening day, nearly 50 people arrived: kids, parents, grandparents. Maya stood at the door, greeting each one, tears pricking her eyes. Inside, her mints led sessions while she floated between rooms, offering guidance, encouragement, applause. She didn't need to be center stage anymore. She was the roots, not the branches. The program flourished. Families returned week after week. Kids begged parents to come back. Teachers began referring students. One evening, a father approached Maya after class. His voice cracked as he said, "I've been drowning in debt for years. This is the first time I feel like I can breathe." Maya hugged him, overwhelmed. It wasn't just theory. It was transformation. Her legacy also grew in quieter ways. She started a modest blog, writing stories and tips. At first, she thought no one would read. But slowly, comments appeared. "Thank you. This helped me so much. I shared this with my daughter." Her words reached beyond her town, beyond her workshops. Legacy had found new soil. But even as she built programs and shared online, Maya knew legacy wasn't about structures alone. It was about stories. One evening, sitting with Sophia, she said, "Do you know why I chose this path?" Sophia shook her head. Maya told her everything: the debt, the exhaustion, the nights of crying in her car, the sacrifices, the joy of discovering enough. Sophia listened, eyes wide. When Maya finished, Sophia whispered, "I want to tell my kids someday. Your story." Maya's throat tightened. Yes, that was legacy. Not buildings. Not curriculums. Stories. Passed down like heirlooms. The narrator's voice here would swell, rich and lyrical. Maya Hernandez discovered that freedom does not end with one person. It ripples. It multiplies. Through workshops, through programs, through stories whispered across generations. Legacy is not wealth left in a bank. Legacy is wisdom left in hearts. And Maya's wisdom was spreading like roots beneath the soil, unseen but unstoppable. Years later, at a reunion of her mints, Maya watched as Elena, Jamal, and others spoke confidently to a room of new students. They told their own stories now, of saving, of resisting debt, of choosing freedom. Maya sat quietly in the back, smiling. Her work was no longer hers. It was theirs. It would be theirs long after she was gone. And that, she realized, was the greatest freedom of all. In her journal that night, she wrote, "Legacy is not built in monuments or millions. Legacy is built in choices repeated, wisdom shared, lives touched. My life has been enough. And enough, shared, becomes infinite." She closed the journal, exhaled, and whispered to the dark, "I am at peace." It had been years since Maya last walked the halls of the hospital. She hadn't avoided it, exactly. But there had been a heaviness, memories of 12-hour shifts, aching feet, the constant alarms, the weight of life and death pressing on her shoulders. Still, when she received an invitation to the retirement celebration of her former supervisor, something inside her stirred. Perhaps it was time. Perhaps it was time to return, not as the weary nurse she once was, but as the woman she had become. On the morning of the event, Maya dressed simply, a navy dress, a cardigan, her silver necklace. She caught her reflection in the mirror. There were more smile lines now, a touch of gray at her temples. But her eyes, deep brown, steady, looked different. Not hollow, not frantic, alive. She whispered to herself, "This is me, full circle." The hospital lobby smelled the same, antiseptic mixed with coffee, the faint hum of machines behind walls. As she walked through, flashes of memory tugged at her. A younger Maya, sprinting down these corridors with a chart in hand. A Maya who had tears in stairwells. A Maya who dreamed, in stolen moments, of a life beyond the walls. Now she was here again, but no longer trapped. Her old colleagues spotted her immediately. "Maya," a nurse cried, rushing over. "You look amazing." Others gathered, hugging her, exclaiming, "We thought you moved away. How's retirement treating you? Tell us your secret. You don't look stressed at all." Maya laughed, warmth flooding her. She shared snippets of her new life, the teaching, the volunteering, the garden. One colleague, exhausted lines etched around her eyes, whispered, "I wish I could do what you did." Maya squeezed her hand. "You can. One step at a time." At the reception, speeches were made. Stories shared. Laughter echoed. But Maya found herself drifting, looking around the room. So many faces she remembered. Faces etched with fatigue, but also with resilience. Heroes, she thought, though they rarely called themselves that. And as she watched, something clicked. Her journey wasn't just about her. It was about them too. The nurses still running double shifts. The aides working for barely enough pay. The young interns already weary. They deserved freedom too. And maybe, just maybe, her story could show them it was possible. Later that evening, she wandered to the old break room. The vending machine still hummed. The couches still sagged. She sat, remembering nights when she scarfed down granola bars between patients, when she fell asleep upright, when she silently wondered if she would ever escape the treadmill. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't feel bitterness. She felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons those years had taught her, about endurance, about compassion, about the true cost of exhaustion. Without those nights, she would never have sought another way. Without that pain, she would not have found freedom. When the party ended, she walked out into the night air, crisp and cool. She paused at the hospital entrance, looking back at the lit windows. "Thank you," she whispered, "for shaping me, for breaking me, for giving me reason to change." And then she turned, walking away with steady steps. In the weeks that followed, Maya found herself reflecting more deeply than ever before. She opened old journals, reread entries filled with fear and desperation. "I don't know how I'll ever pay this debt. I feel like I'm drowning. I wish there were another way." And then she looked at her new entries. "I taught a class today that gave someone hope. I spent only $25 this week on groceries and still ate like a queen." Sophia told me she wants to live simply too. The contrast was staggering. Her story was living proof. Transformation was possible. But Maya didn't stop at reflection. She wanted to bring her journey back to where it began. She reached out to the hospital's HR department with a proposal. Would you let me run a voluntary workshop series for staff? Not medical training, financial literacy. How to save, how to budget, how to build freedom. Nurses need this. I needed this. To her surprise, they said yes. The first session was small, 10 nurses, curious but skeptical. Maya stood at the front of a familiar conference room, her heart pounding. She smiled. I know what it feels like to sit where you are. Tired, stressed, wondering if you'll ever get ahead. That was me for years. But I found a way out. And tonight, I want to show you how. The room went quiet. And then she began. She showed them how to track expenses with a simple notebook. How to build a cushion, even with irregular shifts. How to see debt not as a curse, but as a problem with a solution. They asked questions. They took notes. Some cried quietly, shoulders shaking. At the end, one nurse whispered, "Why didn't anyone teach us this before?" Maya swallowed hard. Because no one taught me either. But now we can change that. Word spread. More staff attended. Soon, the sessions filled every seat. Doctors sat beside nurses. Janitors sat beside administrators. Money, Maya realized, was the great equalizer. Everyone struggled. Everyone wanted freedom. And everyone could learn. One evening, after a session, her old supervisor pulled her aside. Maya, I always admired your determination. But what you're doing now, this is extraordinary. You're giving these people hope. Maya's eyes filled. I just want them to know they're not trapped. Her supervisor smiled softly. You've come full circle. From nurse to teacher. From surviving to leading. Maya nodded, her chest swelling with emotion. Full circle indeed. The narrator's voice here would swell, rich and contemplative. Maya Hernandez returned to the place that once drained her, and turned it into a place where she gave back. She faced her past, not with resentment, but with gratitude. She shared her story, not as an escape, but as an invitation. And in doing so, she proved that freedom is not just a personal journey. It is a circle. We return to where we began, but we are not the same. In her journal that night, Maya wrote, I once thought the hospital was my cage. Now I see it was my classroom. It taught me endurance, compassion, and the value of freedom. Coming back here to teach others is the closing of a circle. And in that circle, there is peace. She closed the notebook, smiled, and whispered, I am whole. The sun was setting, casting long golden streaks across the small garden in Maya's yard. Her tomatoes hung heavy on the vine. Her herbs spilled from clay pots. The world smelled of basil and earth and evening air. She sat on a wooden chair, journal open on her lap, pen resting loosely in her hand. It had been more than 6 years since she retired. 6 years since she walked away from the relentless pace of hospital corridors and chose a quieter, freer life. Looking back now, it felt like lifetimes had passed. She whispered to herself, 40 was my beginning, not my ending. Freedom had given her more than rest, more than travel, more than financial stability. It had given her perspective, and that perspective had changed everything. She thought of the journey, the fear, the doubts, the nights of questioning. She remembered sitting at this very table during the recession, calculator glowing, wondering if her dream would collapse. And she remembered surviving it. Not just surviving, thriving. Now, at 46, she was no longer the woman who once cried in her car during night shifts. She was not the woman who doubted she'd ever climb out of debt. She was something else entirely. A teacher, a mentor, a giver, a seed planter. And in that transformation, she had discovered the horizon beyond herself. That horizon stretched through the Freedom Workshop series, now a permanent part of the community center. Dozens of families cycled through each year. Kids who once learned with play money now managed real savings accounts. Her mints, Elena, Jamal, Sophia, now led sessions of their own. They had become teachers, leaders, dreamers. Watching them, Maya sometimes felt as though she were gazing at a mirror reflecting not her face, but her legacy. And it humbled her. One summer evening, after a workshop, Jamal approached her. I want to start a program at my college, he said, his eyes shining. Financial literacy for first-year students. They hit campus with no clue about debt or credit. I want to change that. Maya smiled, her throat tightening. Do it. The world needs your voice. Later, as she walked home, she realized her story was no longer hers to carry. It had branched, multiplied, grown. And that was the beauty of freedom. It didn't stop with one person. It spread. She thought too of her family. Her brother, once drowning after losing his job, had stabilized. He credited her with teaching him resilience. Her niece Sophia was blossoming, now saving for college, already teaching peers about budgeting. At Christmas, Sophia handed Maya a handwritten card. Tia, you show me that freedom isn't about money. It's about choices. I promise I'll live that way too. Maya cried when she read it. Because that was the horizon. Not wealth hoarded, but wisdom passed. Still, Maya knew her own story was unfinished. There was always more to give, more to learn, more to plant. One day, while tending her balcony garden, she thought of the phrase that had guided her. Enough. Enough wasn't about settling. It wasn't about mediocrity. It was about recognizing abundance in simplicity. It was about savoring tea in the morning, laughter with friends, the glow of a child's eyes when they realized they could save their first $100. Enough wasn't static. It was alive, breathing, expanding. And she realized enough was not just her philosophy. It was her gift to the world. So she began writing a book. Not for profit, not for fame, but for permanence. Each chapter told a part of her journey. The exhaustion of nursing, the moment she chose change, the years of frugality, the triumph of early retirement, the test of inflation, the joy of giving, the power of teaching. She wove in practical lessons. How to track expenses, how to build a safety net, how to start small. But more than that, she wove in heart. Because numbers alone don't free people. Hope does. And she wanted her story to carry hope into hands she would never meet. The narrator's voice would grow solemn here, as if leaning closer to the audience. Maya Hernandez discovered that freedom is not a finish line. It is a horizon that moves as you move, that expands as you grow, that invites you forward, not into wealth alone, but into wisdom. Her life was not extraordinary because she retired at 40. It was extraordinary because she turned that freedom outward, into seeds, into stories, into legacies. Years later, she was invited to speak at a regional conference on financial empowerment. She hesitated at first. Public speaking had never been her dream. But something inside her said yes. On stage, under the bright lights, she looked out at hundreds of faces, teachers, students, professionals, parents. She took a breath and began. I'm not a millionaire. I don't live in a mansion. I don't drive a fancy car. But I am free. I retired at 40 on $30,000 a year, not because I had everything, but because I learned what enough meant. And tonight, I want to tell you that enough is possible for you too. The room was silent, hanging on her words. She told her story, her struggles, her doubts, her victories. She gave practical steps, yes. But more than that, she gave courage. When she finished, the applause roared like thunder. And Maya realized her voice was not just hers anymore. It was part of something larger, a chorus of freedom, echoing far beyond her. That night, back in her hotel room, she looked out the window at the city lights. She whispered, "This is bigger than me." And she smiled. In her journal, she wrote her final reflection of the year. Legacy is not wealth. It is not fame. Legacy is a ripple, a child saving their first dollar, a nurse daring to dream of freedom, a family cooking together instead of overspending. My life began with exhaustion. It ends with enough. And enough is endless. She closed the notebook, placed her pen down, and felt the peace of a circle completed. The narrator's voice here would rise one last time, lyrical, resonant, and full of closure. Maya Hernandez was not rich by the world's standards, but she was free. Free to live simply, free to give generously, free to teach boldly. And in her freedom, she offered the world something more precious than wealth. Hope. Hope that freedom is not reserved for the few. Hope that simplicity can be abundance. Hope that enough is not the end, but the beginning. And as her story closes, the horizon remains, stretching beyond her, toward all who choose to walk it. Because financial freedom is not about money alone. It is about life. And Maya Hernandez lived hers, fully, freely, enough.